It is a strange, agonizing truth how quickly a life built on solid stone can dissolve into sand. I had just finished shedding those bitter, heavy tears at the departure gate, the salt still stinging my cheeks after saying what I believed was a heartbreaking goodbye to my husband, David. He was supposedly boarding a flight to Japan, embarking on a grueling 4-year corporate assignment in Tokyo. A sacrifice he had solemnly sworn, made entirely for the sake of our future. But the elaborate theater of his departure collapsed before his plane could even clear the runway. Standing in the terminal watching the gray New York sky, the sudden sharp vibration of my phone cut through my grief. It was an SMS notification, a cold and clinical digital alert stating that someone had just purchased diamond jewelry worth $15,000, Zao0, charged directly to his platinum credit card. The illusion shattered in an instant. The Tokyo he had painted in colors of duty and ambition was actually a sun-drenched, 6-star luxury resort in Maui, Hawaii. The $90,000 we had meticulously saved together as a married couple, built from years of shared compromises and quiet sacrifices, had suddenly vanished into thin air. It had flown away alongside him and his younger mistress, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my own devotion. I was left with only two things: an endless suffocating betrayal that burned in my chest, and two demanding in-laws who had already unpacked their bags in my home, fully expecting me to serve them hand and foot as if I were nothing more than their hired maid. To understand how the trap had been laid, one had to look back to the evening before. The sudden rain in New York had brought a cold, damp chill that seemed to seep through the double-paned windows of our luxury high-rise apartment on the Upper East Side. I was standing by the massive floor-to-ceiling glass, watching the heavy raindrops hit the pane and slide down like tears. As the minutes ticked by, an inexplicable, heavy unease wrapped itself tightly around my heart. Behind me, the usual quiet elegance of our home was completely shattered by the loud, booming laughter of my in-laws and my husband, a boisterous sound that felt entirely foreign in our neatly curated living room. This was supposed to be a special day of celebration. According to David, he had personally driven all the way to Pennsylvania, navigating the winding roads to their small, quiet rural town, to bring his parents back to the city to live with us. Richard and Teresa had arrived with a heavy assortment of rustic gifts from their countryside home. A basket filled with jars of homemade jams, pickled summer vegetables, and carefully wrapped fragile fresh farm eggs. At first glance, sitting there on our sleek marble kitchen island, it looked like the perfect, heartwarming picture of a happy family reunion. But my feminine instinct, an intuitive radar forged and sharpened over 7 years of living with David, told me that something was deeply off. I could see it in the way their eyes darted around the room, restless and evasive, refusing to hold my gaze for more than a second. The dinner I prepared was far more elaborate than our usual weeknight meals. Desperate to ease the underlying tension, I had left my office early to cook a classic slow-simmered pot roast and a rich, earthy wild mushroom risotto, David's absolute favorite, and a dish I knew his parents cherished. David sat proudly at the head of the long dining table, pouring a heavy, dark Napa Valley Cabernet for his father, Richard. He wore a smile that seemed permanently glued to his face, a plastic mask of filial piety. When the main course was served, he cleared his throat with a loud, deliberate rasp and set his heavy crystal glass down on the table with a sharp, echoing thud to grab our attention. David looked at me, his gaze lingering for a fraction of a second before he turned to his parents, his voice dropping into a solemn, rehearsed tone. "Mom, Dad, Eleanor, I brought you all here together today to announce something of monumental importance. The company has decided to send a key employee to Tokyo for advanced executive training, and to manage our brand new branch there for 4 shogis." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the warm air of the dining room. "This is a golden, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. When I come back, I won't just be a manager. I'll be a vice president. The board of directors trusted me personally with this crucial mission, and I have accepted it." I froze in my seat. The heavy silver fork slipped from my fingers, clattering loudly against the edge of my fine china plate. 4 years. That was an enormously, terrifyingly long time. And he had signed his name to it without mentioning a single solitary word to his own wife. I stared at him across the table, my heart hammering against my ribs as I fought with everything I had to keep my voice steady and controlled. "You're going to Tokyo for 4 years? Why didn't you tell me about such an important, life-altering decision right away?" David quickly reached across the table and took my hand, his grip warm but entirely devoid of real comfort. His eyes were wide and full of a carefully manufactured guilt, but beneath the surface, I could clearly see the cold falsehood hiding behind them. Eleanor, honey, please forgive me. It all happened so incredibly fast. The CEO called me into his office, made the offer, and I had to decide right there on the spot. Otherwise, the position would have been handed to someone else in a heartbeat. I'm doing this for the future of our family. When I get back, we can finally give our future kids a truly great life. We can buy a big, beautiful house in the suburbs and not be squeezed into this apartment anymore. Hearing the news that her son was going overseas to conquer the corporate world, Teresa's face lit up with a sudden radiant joy. The triumphant smile did not leave her lips for a second. She clapped her worn hands together in a burst of sheer ecstasy and exclaimed, her voice rising to a high pitch as if she were trying to shout over the drumming of the rain outside. Oh Lord, what wonderful news! 7 generations of our family have dreamed of something like this. Look how talented our David is, going to Japan, all the way to Asia. Richard, do you hear this? It's a great honor for our family. Go, son. Don't worry. Eleanor will take care of the house. Teresa turned her radiant, tear-glistened face toward her husband, her voice trembling with a mixture of pride and fierce ambition. Richard, do you hear this? Do you hear what our boy has achieved? It is a great honor, an absolute triumph for our family. Go, son. Pursue your destiny. Don't you worry about a single thing back here. Eleanor will take care of the house, won't you, dear? Richard, sitting stolidly in his chair, let a slow, proud smile spread across his weathered face. He nodded in solemn agreement, the heavy lines on his forehead softening. He raised his glass, the amber liquid catching the dim light of the dining room, and drank happily, swallowing the wine with a deep sigh of satisfaction. A man needs to see the world, Richard declared, his voice carrying the gravelly weight of his own unfulfilled youth. You're doing the right thing, son. Your mother and I support you completely with all our hearts. David turned his gaze to me, his eyes bright with an intensity that felt almost performative. Under the table, his fingers slid over mine, his hand squeezing gently, a gesture meant to pass his unshakable confidence on to me. But as his fingers wrapped around mine, a shiver went down my spine. His palm was ice-cold, clammy, and devoid of any genuine warmth. He continued laying out his perfect plan, his voice dropping into that smooth, persuasive cadence he used when he was pitching a high-stakes deal, presenting this arrangement as if it were a beautifully wrapped gift. Eleanor, sweetheart, I'm going far away, to a different corner of the earth, and the thought of leaving you alone in this bustling city tears at me. Much less can I bear the thought of abandoning my parents in their quiet, isolated small town while I am oceans away. That's why I've already figured it all out, down to the very last detail. He leaned in closer, his breath warm against my cheek, though his eyes remained strangely detached. During the 4 years I'm away, they will stay here with you so you have company and they can also help you with the cooking. It is the perfect solution. That way, you will have constant company in this quiet apartment, and they can also help you with the daily cooking so you don't have to worry after a long day at work. And in return, you'll watch over their health, keep them safe, and fulfill my duty as a son to them. I know you, Eleanor. I know you're an understanding and loving wife. You won't let me down, right? David's words felt like an invisible rope tightening around my neck, soft at first touch but tightening mercilessly, squeezing the breath right out of my lungs. He had orchestrated this entire scene, positioning his pieces with a master tactician's precision, placing me in a corner from which there was no clean escape. If I refused, if I spoke the truth of my reluctance in front of them, I would look like a selfish, terrible daughter-in-law who hindered her husband's career and refused to care for his parents. But if I accepted, if I nodded and played the submissive wife, I'd face the reality of living under the same roof with a mother-in-law known for being demanding and hypercritical. While my husband was dreaming of far-off lands, I looked across the table at Teresa and saw her examining my every move, her sharp, hawk-like eyes dissecting the tension in my shoulders, waiting for a slip-up. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to suppress the hot wave of irritation and panic building in my chest, forcing my voice to remain calm and level. I'm not going to stand in the way of your career, David, but your parents staying here for 4 years is something I think we need to discuss. I turned to Teresa and Richard, trying to soften my tone with a look of genuine concern. They are used to the wide open spaces of the country, the fresh air, the freedom of Pennsylvania. This is just an apartment and it's small, cramped even. They might not be comfortable and it could affect their health. Plus, I spend all day at work, often pulling long hours, and I might not be able to give them enough attention and proper care. The moment the words left my mouth, the fragile peace at the table shattered. Teresa immediately scowled, her face hardening instantly as her brow furrowed into a deep, furious line. She slammed her plate down on the table with a sharp, metallic clatter that made the glasses ring. Eleanor, what are you trying to say? Do you think of us elders as a burden and you're scared we will weigh you down, drag you into the mud? My son sacrifices himself for this household, crossing oceans to work his fingers to the bone, and now that he's leaving, he asks you to take care of his parents, but you're already refusing and you still call yourself a good wife and daughter-in-law. Before the firestorm could consume the room, David jumped in quickly, his hands raised in a placating gesture. His voice was soft and soothing, the perfect balm to quiet his mother's rage, but when his eyes locked onto mine, there was a heavy, suffocating pressure in his gaze. Mom, what are you saying? That's not what Eleanor means. My wife is just worried you won't be comfortable here, that's all. She's thinking of your well-being. Then he turned back to me, his eyes imploring, pleading, yet chillingly demanding. Honey, they are getting older. They're fine today, but tomorrow we don't know what might happen. Leaving them alone in Pennsylvania while I'm so far away, half a world away in Asia, I wouldn't be able to focus on work. I would be constantly sick with worry. If you love me, help me. Think of it as helping me carry this family responsibility so I can focus on my career. I promise I'll send you my entire paycheck. Buy whatever you want. Spend it however you like, without question. Hearing him talk about money and responsibility, lay his guilt-tripping net so perfectly in front of his parents, I knew I couldn't say no in front of his parents. I felt forced to agree, a heavy weight sinking deep into my heart, dragging my spirits down into the dark. All right, if you've all decided and your parents want to stay, I accept. I just ask that you be patient with me if I make any mistakes along the way. Instantly, I saw the immense wave of relief wash over David's handsome face. The tension left his shoulders, and a triumphant grin spread across his lips. He poured more wine for his father and started talking about a bright future, a lake house and European vacations for the whole family, painting vivid pictures of a luxurious life of ease and status. Booming laughter echoed through the room again, bouncing off the narrow walls, while I sat there chewing my risotto as if it tasted incredibly bitter, thick and dry, as if it had been seasoned with my own quiet defeat. Looking at David, the man I had shared a bed with for years, the man whose face I thought I knew better than my own, I suddenly felt like he was a total stranger, a character wearing a mask of my husband. Why was he in such a rush to leave the country? Why couldn't he look me straight in the eye when they talked about the trip? Why did he keep looking down or looking away, unable to meet my gaze whenever the conversation turned to the details of his departure? My gut, that quiet, insistent voice of intuition, told me something was very wrong behind this perfect picture, but I couldn't figure it out. There was a dark, hidden truth lurking beneath his grand promises, but try as I might, the pieces of the puzzle refused to align. After dinner, the heavy silence of the apartment settled in as I was cleaning up in the kitchen, washing the dishes in the warm, soapy water. From the living room, the loud, intrusive blare of the television set cut through the heavy silence of the kitchen, accompanied by the sharp, grating laughter of my in-laws. It was a sound that felt entirely out of place, a forced warmth that only emphasized the coldness settling in my chest. I stood by the sink, the soapy water turning cold against my hands, my gaze wandering aimlessly until it caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. Through the glass pane of the balcony door I saw David. He stepped out into the damp evening air, his posture tense, his shoulders hunched as if trying to shield himself from the world. He was making a phone call. I watched him raise the receiver to his ear, his lips moving rapidly as he spoke in a hushed, urgent whisper. One hand was cupped tightly over his mouth, a desperate barrier to keep his words from drifting back into the house, or perhaps to keep them from reaching me. Suspicion, cold and sharp, coiled in my stomach. I dried my hands on a dish towel and took a slow, deliberate step toward the balcony, my heart hammering against my ribs. But before I could close the distance, he abruptly ended the call. He turned, catching me in his line of sight, and instantly, a mask slid over his features. A plastic, hollow smile plastered itself onto his face as he slid the door open and stepped back inside. His demeanor far too casual, far too perfect. That night, the sky opened up, pouring a relentless torrent of rain against our bedroom window. David slept with a terrifying ease. He lay beside me, snoring loudly, his deep rhythmic breaths completely unbothered by the storm outside or the tempest raging within his own home. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my eyes wide and dry. The rain drummed a chaotic rhythm, but it was nothing compared to the unanswered questions swirling violently in my mind. Who was that phone call for? Why the secrecy? The man sleeping mere inches from me felt like a ghost, a beautifully crafted illusion of the husband I thought I knew. By the time the gray light of dawn filtered through the blinds, the entire apartment was suffocated by an air of melancholy and impending goodbyes. Yet, to my quiet surprise, it was David who seemed the most profoundly affected, his emotions worn like a carefully tailored coat. He was awake before the alarm, his movements hurried and precise. I watched him double-check the brass locks of his suitcase, his fingers lingering on the leather, before he dressed in a sharp, immaculate business suit that made him look every bit the successful corporate executive. In the kitchen, the heavy aroma of coffee and frying bacon hung thick in the air. His parents had also risen early, driven by a frantic energy to prepare a massive breakfast. They hovered over him, coaxing and practically forcing David to eat plate after plate, insisting he would need every ounce of energy for the grueling long flight ahead. Teresa, her eyes already red and swollen, refused to let go of her son's hand. She clung to him as if he were a boy embarking on his very first journey, her voice cracking as she wept. She showered him with a ceaseless torrent of motherly advice, reminding him to eat proper meals, to wear his heavy coat, and to guard his belongings against the untrustworthy strangers that surely lurked in foreign lands. David absorbed it all with patient, dutiful nods, the picture of a devoted son. Then turning his gaze toward me, he checked his wrist. "Eleanor, take me to the airport. The flight is at 10 o'clock. We need to leave now." The urgency in his voice was palpable, a sudden crack in his calm facade. Without a word, I reached for my leather purse and the heavy metal of my car keys, the cold brass grounding me. The drive to JFK was a blur of gray asphalt and red brake lights. Throughout the journey, David's hand remained firmly clasped over mine, his grip tight, almost desperate. He leaned close, whispering sweet, honeyed words into the quiet cabin of the car. "It's going to be hard for you at home, babe. I'll FaceTime you as soon as I land. Please take care of yourself. Don't overwork yourself, and if my parents complain about anything, just be understanding. Do it for me, okay?" I kept my eyes locked onto the wet road ahead, the windshield wipers sweeping back and forth with a rhythmic hiss. I gave a barely perceptible nod, a mechanical gesture to keep the peace. Beneath the surface, there was no grief, no sorrow over my husband's departure. There was only a profound, hollow emptiness, a weariness that settled deep into my bones. When the car finally pulled up to the curb of the bustling International Departures Terminal at JFK, the chaos of departing travelers and blaring horns surrounded us. David pulled me into a tight, crushing hug, pressing a lingering kiss to my forehead. He grabbed his heavy luggage, his boots clicking against the pavement, and walked toward the entrance. Even then, he did not forget his final performance. He turned back just before entering, flashing me a brilliant, bright smile and waving. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching his straight back disappear completely as the automatic sliding glass doors parted and swallowed him whole. Standing there in the chilly morning air, I searched my heart for tears, for the dull ache of separation that a loving wife should feel. But there was absolutely nothing. Instead, a strange, quiet relief washed over me, a sensation remarkably like having a deep, festering thorn finally drawn from my flesh. Yet, almost immediately, the dark, clawing unease that had haunted me the day before returned with a terrifying vengeance. I climbed back into the driver's seat, the leather cold against my back, and twisted the key in the ignition. The engine hummed to life, ready to carry me toward the distraction of my office. Suddenly, a sharp, demanding buzz erupted from inside my purse. I reached in and pulled out my phone. The screen flickered to life with a notification from my bank. Normally, I would have dismissed it as another automated promotional alert, But a lifetime of professional discipline and financial vigilance made me glance at the text. What I saw made my foot slam violently onto the brake pedal. The car lurched to a halt, tires screeching against the asphalt as I frantically pulled over onto the narrow shoulder of the road. My heart battered against my ribcage like a trapped bird trying to break free. A transaction of $15,000 from the authorized user card, linked to your account, was made at a jewelry boutique on Fifth Avenue, New York. The words swam before my eyes. I rubbed my eyelids, my vision blurring, and read the message once, twice, 5 times, praying it was a mistake. $15,000. A staggering, monumental sum of money, spent in the heart of Fifth Avenue, one of the most notoriously extravagant luxury shopping districts on the planet. A sickening wave of dizziness washed over me, making the steering wheel slip beneath my damp palms. I had authorized that card for David solely for his corporate travels, for client entertainment, emergencies, and unexpected business expenses. He had just walked into the airport. He was supposedly clearing security, preparing to board a 12-hour flight to Tokyo. Why then, at this exact second, was $15,000 being drained from my account at a high-end jewelry store in the middle of Manhattan? Only 2 cold, logical explanations existed in this universe. Either his card had been compromised by a sophisticated hacker, or my husband was not at the airport at all. I forced a long, deep breath into my lungs, commanding my racing pulse to slow. The grueling years of managing high-stakes corporate crises had conditioned me for moments like this. Panic was a luxury I could not afford. I dialed the bank's emergency fraud hotline. When a voice answered on the other end, my own voice was a blade of ice, flat, resolute, and devoid of even the slightest tremor. Good morning. I am the primary cardholder. I just received a notification about a large transaction that I believe is fraudulent. I request that you immediately freeze all cards linked to this account, including the primary and all authorized user cards. The representative on the other end, sensing the absolute gravity in my tone, immediately began verifying my identity, her fingers tapping rapidly on her keyboard. Within moments, she confirmed that the hold had been successfully placed, cutting off the financial lifeline of the card instantly. After hanging up, I sat in the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, draining of all color under the harsh glare of the dashboard lights. The leather of the wheel felt cold and unforgiving beneath my palms, a stark contrast to the sudden, suffocating heat rising in my chest. If the card had indeed been stolen by some random thief, David would have called me immediately. He was always so meticulous, so hypervigilant about our finances and security. But the phone on the passenger seat remained stubbornly, agonizingly silent. I picked it up, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed his number. I held the device to my ear, listening to the hollow synthetic ring before the mechanical, lifeless voice of the operator cut in. The number you have dialed is currently unavailable. His phone was off, a detail that perfectly fit the elaborate story he had spun about boarding a long-haul flight to Tokyo. But as I sat there in the quiet sanctuary of the car, the dark, twisting logic of the situation began to unfold in my mind. How could a $15,000 transaction at a luxury boutique on Fifth Avenue be explained away as a mere theft? No common thief, no matter how bold, would dare to stroll casually into a high-end jewelry store, present a stolen card, and walk away with diamonds. Those places were heavily fortified, covered from every conceivable angle in high-definition security cameras, guarded by professionals, and staffed by sales associates trained to verify every piece of identification. It was an impossibility. A terrifying, icy thought began to crawl up my spine, freezing the very blood in my veins. David had lied. He wasn't thousands of miles away in the air, flying over the Pacific. He was right here in the beating heart of New York, and he had just spent a small fortune on diamonds for someone else. The memory of the previous night washed over me with sickening clarity. I remembered his restless, darting eyes as we sat at the dinner table, his inability to hold my gaze for more than a fleeting second. I remembered the hushed, secretive tone of his voice as he paced the balcony in the dark, shielding his phone with his shoulder, and the hurried, almost frantic energy of his departure this morning. Every half-truth, every deflected question, every sudden movement, all the disparate, jagged pieces of the puzzle were suddenly rushing together, aligning to paint a horrifying, undeniable picture of betrayal. I didn't go to the office. The thought of sitting at a desk pretending to care about corporate metrics while my life imploded was unbearable. I spun the steering wheel, turned the car around, and headed straight into the concrete canyons of the city. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes, to confront the reality of what was happening. But as the tires hummed against the asphalt and the city skyline loomed ahead, a cold wave of rationality washed over me. I realized I couldn't just walk into a prestigious Fifth Avenue jeweler, bang my fists on the glass display cases, and demand to see their private security footage. They wouldn't give it to a private citizen. To them, I was just a hysterical stranger with no legal authority. I had to be smart. I had to be precise. I pulled over, parking in a quiet spot near an unassuming coffee shop, the kind of place where people went to disappear into the background. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roasted beans and low murmurs. I ordered a black coffee. No sugar. No milk. Just pure, unadulterated bitterness. As the hot, dark liquid hit my tongue, the sharp tang of it anchored me, forcing my chaotic, spiraling thoughts into a cold, logical order. I opened my banking app, the screen glowing like a beacon of my misfortune in the dim light of the cafe. I began to painstakingly review the transaction history, scrolling past the mundane, everyday expenses of our shared life. And there, beneath the glaring $15,000 scar of the jewelry purchase, I discovered the breadcrumbs of a secret life. Several smaller, yet highly significant charges from the past week stared back at me. High-end French bistros, intimate rooftop bars, and boutique women's fashion labels. Places I had never set foot in, places he had never once mentioned. A woman's intuition is a quiet, powerful thing, and mine had never been wrong. I had been blind, wrapped in a blanket of trust, while a massive, cruel deception was orchestrated right before my eyes. My husband, the man I shared a bed with, the man who whispered promises of forever into my ear, had pulled off a flawless, award-winning performance to fool me. He had systematically dumped his aging, demanding parents on me, leaving me to shoulder the burden of their care under the guise of his important business trip, while he slipped away to indulge in a lavish secret fantasy, spending the very money we had labored together to earn. A single heavy tear escaped my eye, hot and salty, carving a path down my cheek. Then another. I let them fall for a brief second, feeling the raw, burning pain of a broken heart, before I viciously wiped them away with the back of my hand. Crying now was a luxury I could not afford. Tears wouldn't get me answers. They wouldn't give me leverage. I needed hard, undeniable proof. I needed to know exactly where David was, who he was with, and what he was doing. I thought of Paul, my best friend from college. We had been inseparable during our university years, and he had gone on to become a brilliant force in cybersecurity. A man who navigated the invisible digital highways of the world with ease and possessed extensive connections that stretched far beyond the ordinary. I pulled up his contact and dialed. "Paul, it's Eleanor," I said, my voice tight, stripped of all warmth. "Can you help me with something extremely urgent? I need to track someone's location and movements. My life depends on it." On the other end of the line, the casual background noise of Paul's office seemed to fade. He didn't ask foolish questions, nor did he offer empty platitudes. He immediately understood the sheer gravity, the absolute desperation in my tone, and agreed without hesitation. I hung up, a small cold spark of hope igniting in my chest. I sat there for a long time, staring at the bustling, indifferent traffic through the cafe window. Outside, the gray clouds had suddenly parted. The rain had ceased and a bright, mocking sun was beginning to illuminate the wet streets. But inside my soul, the sky was pitch black, and a tempest of rage was just beginning to gather its strength. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to be the pathetic, silent victim. If David had dared to betray me, to spit on our vows and our shared sacrifices, he would pay dearly. By the time I pulled into the driveway of our apartment building, the sky had bruised into a deep, dark twilight. I walked up to the door, half hoping to find some remnant of the tender, emotional farewell we had shared just hours ago. But as the key turned in the lock, the heavy, suffocating silence of the apartment greeted me like a physical blow. There was no warmth here, no lingering trace of the morning's tearful goodbyes. The moment I stepped across the threshold, my breath caught in my throat. The pristine sanctuary of our home had been utterly desecrated. An incredible, chaotic mess stretched across the living room. Shattered and intact pistachio shells were scattered like gravel across the hardwood floor. Empty sticky glasses were strewn carelessly across the polished mahogany coffee table, leaving unsightly rings on the wood. The television was blasting at a deafening, obnoxious volume, the laugh track of some mindless comedy special reverberating off the walls. My father-in-law was sprawled out asleep on the velvet sofa, his dirty sock-covered feet propped up on the armrest, snoring with a loud rattling cadence that competed with the TV. In the kitchen, my mother-in-law, Teresa, was aggressively rummaging through the refrigerator, clinking jars and rustling bags with absolute disregard. When Teresa finally noticed my presence, she didn't even bother to ask how my day at work had been. Nor did she acknowledge the exhaustion etched into my face. Instead, she slammed the refrigerator door shut with a sharp metallic bang, turned to face me, and said with a voice dripping with bitter reproach, "And where have you been? Your father and I nearly starved to death here, and dinner still isn't ready. What? Do you plan on letting us go hungry? Us elderly folks?" I slowly looked down at my watch. The hands pointed to exactly 7:30 p.m. On any normal day, this was the hour I would just be shutting down my computer and leaving the office. I swallowed the thick, burning wave of irritation that threatened to choke me. Dropping my heavy leather bag onto a nearby chair, I forced my voice into a calm, measured yet icy register. "I just got home from work, Mom. There are plenty of fresh groceries in the fridge and leftovers in the containers. You could have easily started cooking." The suggestion of self-sufficiency was apparently an unpardonable insult. Teresa's face instantly flushed a dark, angry red. She flared up, planted her hands firmly on her hips, and marched toward me like a general going to war. "Look at Miss Snow. Smart Alec." The words dripped from her lips like venom, coating the tense, stagnant air of the living room. "The moment your husband leaves, you show your true colors. I am your mother-in-law, Eleanor. Do you hear me? I came here to rest, to enjoy the fruits of what my son has earned through his sweat and blood, not to serve you. My son works himself to the bone day in and day out just to keep this house running. And the only thing you have to do, the absolute bare minimum, is cater to his parents. Yet, here you are, complaining like a spoiled child." I looked her dead in the eye, my gaze steady and unblinking, refusing to grant her the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. In the past, I would have swallowed the bitter lump of resentment in my throat. I would have forced a polite, apologetic smile, bending my spine to preserve the fragile illusion of family peace, doing it all out of respect for David, the man I once believed was my partner in all things. But now that the agonizing truth had been laid bare, now that I knew with absolute, shattering certainty that he was cheating on me, any shred of respect I had ever harbored for this family had vanished, evaporating into nothingness like mist under a harsh, unforgiving sun. "You're right, Mom," I said, my voice shockingly calm, devoid of the trembling weakness they were so accustomed to exploiting. "I also work. I also wake up early every single morning to earn money, and let me remind you that half of this apartment was bought with my hard-earned money. I am not asking you to be my servants. But make no mistake, I am not your maid either." Teresa froze. Her jaw slackened and her chest heaved as she stared at me, looking like she hadn't expected that sharp, defiant response from me. For years, she had known me only as the quiet, accommodating daughter-in-law who absorbed every slight with a bowed head. To see me standing tall, matching her glare with cold indifference, seemed to crack her carefully constructed reality. She sucked in a sharp breath, her face flushing a deep, angry crimson, her mouth opening as she prepared to scream, to unleash a torrent of familiar, high-pitched abuse. But before she could utter a single syllable, I stopped her with a raised hand. A simple, quiet gesture that carried the weight of an iron wall. "I am tired," I said, my voice cutting through her impending outburst like a scalpel. "And I don't want to argue. But since we are going to be living together for a long time, I think we need to establish some ground rules to avoid conflicts." Without waiting for her reaction, I walked past her, my shoulders straight, and entered the kitchen. The cool linoleum under my feet felt grounding. I poured myself a tall glass of cold water, watching the condensation bead on the glass. I drank it slowly, feeling the chill slide down my parched throat, washing away the dust of the office and the suffocating heat of their entitlement. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the quiet strength settle into my bones, and then returned to the living room. By now my father-in-law Richard was awake. He was sitting up on the sofa, rubbing his eyes, looking thoroughly confused and disoriented by the commotion that had disrupted his evening slumber. I stood before them both, holding myself with absolute clarity, my voice echoing in the quiet apartment. Rule number 1: food. I work all day, and dinner is the only meal I have the time or energy to cook. From now on, you will handle your own breakfast and lunch. I will buy groceries and leave them in the fridge. But whoever eats is the one who cleans up. Wash your dishes immediately. Do not let them pile up in the sink waiting for me to do them. Teresa shrieked, a high-pitched, incredulous sound that vibrated off the walls. The nerve! The absolute nerve of this girl. I didn't let her finish. I pressed on, my voice rising slightly, cutting her off with absolute authority. Rule number 2: cleaning. Look around you. The floor is a mess. Be careful when you walk, and under no circumstances do you throw trash on the floor. Everyone cleans their own space and no one, absolutely no one, enters my bedroom without my permission. It is my private sanctuary. I paused, letting the silence hang heavily in the room, making sure they understood the gravity of my words. I looked at each of them in turn, emphasizing every single word of my final boundary. And finally, rule number 3: respect for personal space. I come home from work exhausted, carrying the weight of our entire livelihood. I need to rest. Please keep your voices down, and lower the TV volume after 10 p.m. Teresa's face twisted in rage, her features contorting into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Her eyes bulged and she turned frantically to Richard, her hands waving wildly in the air as she yelled, "Do you see this? Do you see how this daughter-in-law is walking all over us? David hasn't even been gone a day, and his wife is already trying to kick his parents out. Oh my God, why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve such disrespect?" Richard also frowned, his brow furrowed into deep, disapproving lines. He stood up slowly, attempting to draw himself up to his full height, wrapping himself in the familiar cloak of patriarchal dominance. His voice grew deep and authoritative, the voice of a man accustomed to unquestioned obedience. "Eleanor, aren't you ashamed of what you're saying? We are the elders. You are the youth. You should show respect. Who do you think you are to make demands here? This house belongs to my son, and we will live in it however we please." I smiled bitterly. His son's house. The irony of it tasted like ash in my mouth. They truly believed their own delusion. The legal deed to this condo is in both our names, but what they didn't know, or chose to conveniently forget, was that 90% of the down payment came directly from the savings of my own loving parents, who had worked themselves to the bone to give me a secure future. David only contributed a small fraction from the mortgage that I am paying right now with my own salary. And where was their precious son now? David ran off with another woman, fleeing his responsibilities, and he had sneakily drained all our joint savings accounts to fund his romantic getaway. I have absolutely no obligation to support and wait on my husband's parents while he's off having fun with someone else, spending my future. Richard stood up, taking a step toward me, his face turning an angry purple, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You're lying. You are a liar, Eleanor. David went to Tokyo to provide for our family. You are a treacherous wife trying to steal your husband's house while he is away. I'm calling David. He'll put you in your place, you'll see." Calmly, without a hint of fear or hesitation, I pulled out my phone from my pocket. I hadn't received the full, written confirmation and dossier from Paul, my private investigator, yet, but I already knew more than enough to tear David's world apart. "Go ahead, call him. Try to get a hold of him. But while you do, let me make one thing abundantly clear to you both. I've already filed for divorce. My lawyer is finalizing the papers as we speak, and the court will soon order a freeze on all of David's assets. And as for this apartment, I am the legal co-owner. I am giving you exactly 3 days. If you are not gone by then, I will call building security and the police to have your things removed from my property." The silence that followed was deafening. Their expressions froze, the reality of my words finally piercing through their thick armor of denial. With that, I turned around and walked into my bedroom, locking the door behind me. The sharp metallic click of the lock sliding into place felt like the most liberating sound I had ever heard in my life. Outside, the quiet was instantly shattered. I could hear Teresa's screams and curses rising once more, mixing with the violent sound of Richard slamming the furniture against the floor in a desperate, childish tantrum. Through the thin walls, I heard the rapid, repetitive sound of buttons being pressed. They tried calling David endlessly, dialing his number over and over, desperately seeking the savior who had already abandoned them. I leaned my back against the locked door, closing my eyes as the muffled, chaotic noise washed over me. Outside, I could hear Teresa yelling into her phone. "Son, pick up. Your wife is throwing us out on the street." Her voice, usually so sharp and demanding, cracked on the final syllable, dissolving into a desperate, high-pitched wail that reverberated through the thin hollow wood of my closed bedroom door. But the only answer that returned from the ether was the cold, mechanical silence of an unavailable number, a digital void that offered neither comfort, warmth, nor salvation. Or perhaps David was simply too busy, too thoroughly enraptured in the clandestine warmth of his mistress's embrace, to bother answering the frantic, shrill pleas of his own mother. That night, as I lay motionless in the heavy darkness of my bedroom, the apartment seemed to hum with a quiet, toxic tension. Through the walls, I listened to their endless, low-register whining, the rhythmic, grating hum of Teresa's self-pitying whimpers and Richard's heavy, petulant movements as they paced the hallway like displaced, disgruntled pests. Yet, amidst the ambient noise of their misery, there was not a single shadow of doubt, not a tremor of hesitation left in my heart. The cold clarity of betrayal had burned away all my illusions. I realized then, with a devastating sharpness, that kindness offered to those who possess no capacity for gratitude is not a virtue. It is merely stupidity disguised as grace. I had played the fool for far too long, sacrificing my own peace to cushion their unearned comfort. It was time to reclaim the shattered pieces of my life, to rebuild myself from the foundation up. And that reconstruction had to begin with the ruthless eviction of those who had proven themselves entirely unworthy of standing beneath my roof. The next day, the first pale light of dawn had barely grazed the windowpane when I woke, hours earlier than my body was accustomed to. There was no lethargy in my bones today, only a quiet driving purpose. I dressed with meticulous, almost ceremonial care, selecting a sharp, dark navy business suit tailored to perfection, pairing it with a structured blazer designed to project absolute, unyielding authority. It was my armor for the battle ahead. When I finally stepped out of my bedroom, the air in the living room was thick and suffocating. I deliberately ignored the venomous, dirty looks cast my way by my in-laws, who sat huddled at the dining table, sullenly chewing on dry toast like defeated, bitter conspirators. I did not grant them the dignity of a glance, let alone a word. With my head held high and my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood, I walked straight out the door and into the crisp morning air. Today, my destination was not the familiar, predictable routine of my corporate office. Instead, I was driving toward a different kind of reckoning, heading to a crucial meeting with my attorney, Michael Sterling. His office was nestled on the 10th floor of a quiet, towering corporate building, a sanctuary of polished glass and steel where legal battles were quietly fought and won. I had known Michael for many years. He was a man revered not just for his razor-sharp intellect, but for an unwavering, relentless dedication to his clients. Stepping into his sunlit office, the scent of old paper and leather grounding me, I placed a thick manila folder on his desk. Within it lay the cold, hard truths, the detailed bank statements I had meticulously printed in the quiet hours of the morning. "Please, Michael," I said, my voice barely above a whisper but carrying the heavy weight of my desperation. "See if there is a way to track where this money has gone." Sterling adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, took the folder into his hands, and began to slowly review the documents page by page. The office fell into a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the rhythmic, dry rustle of paper sliding against paper. After what felt like an eternity, perhaps 5 agonizing minutes, he finally looked up, his expression settling into a grim, deeply serious mask. "Eleanor," he began, his voice low and measured, "the situation is far more complicated and deceitful than you originally imagined. My paralegals ran a preliminary check on these specific accounts. Over the past 6 months, your husband has systematically and gradually transferred a total of $90,000 into the personal account of a woman named Isabella Vance. $90,000. Those words did not just hurt. They struck me like a physical blow. A sudden thunderbolt tearing through a perfectly clear blue sky. My ears began to ring with a high, deafening pitch, and the room seemed to tilt on its axis. That sum was not just a number on a page. It was our entire life savings, accumulated over 7 long, grueling years of marriage. It included the hard-won investment returns that I had poured my heart, soul, and endless overtime hours into building. We had made a sacred promise to each other that by the end of this very year, we would use that exact nest egg to buy a beautiful townhouse in the quiet suburbs, a place to finally build our future. And now, the name Isabella Vance vibrated in my mind with a sickening, sudden familiarity. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to dig through the archives of my memory. Of course, Isabella. She was a former intern at David's firm 2 years ago. I had met her once, briefly, at a bustling corporate holiday party. She had appeared as a fragile young woman with a soft, melodic Southern accent and wide, seemingly innocent eyes that disarmed everyone she spoke to. Back then, she had trailed after David like an adoring puppy, hanging on his every word, always addressing him as Mr. David, with a breathless, reverent admiration that I had foolishly misread. I remembered with a wave of bitter irony how I had actually praised David back then for being such a generous, patient mentor to her, completely blind to the fact that I was warmly nurturing a venomous viper in the very heart of my own home. Attorney Sterling continued his methodical analysis, his tone remaining clinical and calm, though each syllable felt like a serrated blade piercing my chest. The nature of these transfers was incredibly sneaky, Eleanor. He was clever. Sometimes he would wire $1,000, sometimes $5,000, and occasionally a larger sum of $10,000. Under the memo line of each transaction, he systematically wrote payment for goods or office materials. If you weren't looking at the cumulative grand total, it would be almost impossible to notice anything was amiss. This Isabella Vance is only 24 years old, originally from Miami. On paper, she is officially unemployed. Yet, just 2 months ago, a luxury condominium in the heart of Miami was purchased entirely in her name. I clenched my fists so tightly that my knuckles turned stark white, my nails digging deep into my palms until the sharp pain became a welcome anchor against the rising tide of my fury. David had not fallen into a reckless, impulsive mistake. He had been calculating, planning, and executing this betrayal for a very long time. He had been systematically draining our shared marital assets, bleeding our joint history dry to construct a lavish, sun-drenched love nest with his mistress. That money represented my sweat, my tears, my sleepless nights spent working myself to the bone, and he had simply reached into our lives, stolen it, and handed it all over to another woman. What do I do now, Michael? I asked, my voice trembling with a volatile mixture of grief and burning rage. I will not, just stand by and let that money disappear. He looked across the desk at me, his eyes softening with a profound, quiet sympathy. Right now, Eleanor, the most critical thing you can do is stay absolutely calm. We have clear, undeniable evidence of the wire transfers, but to claw that money back, we must legally prove that these funds were marital property, and that the transfers were executed entirely without your knowledge or consent, with the explicit intent to hide assets. I will immediately help you draft a comprehensive divorce petition, and file an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order to freeze all of his active accounts. But before we can strike, you need to be absolutely certain of where David is physically located right now. I nodded slowly, a dark, unwavering fire kindling in my chest. My eyes burned with a searing righteous rage. I will find him, I whispered, the words a solemn vow. Thank you, Michael. Leaving the hushed, protective sanctuary of the lawyer's office, I stepped back out into the harsh daylight and got into my car. Shutting the door, the sudden silence of the vehicle wrapped around me, and a heavy, suffocating lump rose in my throat, threatening to break my hard-won composure. I sat there for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, looking through the windshield at the bustling city outside. I watched the dense, endless crowds of people on the street, everyone rushing around with their own lives wrapped in their own silent dramas, blissfully unaware, or perhaps, like me, carrying a quiet, shattering storm within. I stared through the windshield as the world moved in a blur of gray coats and hurried footsteps. How many other women walking those very pavements, holding hands with men they believed in, were being systematically, ruthlessly deceived? How many of them were living a beautifully constructed lie, sleeping next to a stranger who wore the familiar face of a husband? The memory of David's voice, once my sanctuary, rushed back to torment me. I could still feel the phantom warmth of his breath against my ear, the tender gravity in his eyes as he uttered those sweet, deceptive words. I'm doing this all for the family, sweetheart. You are what I love most in this world. It had sounded so sacred, a vow whispered in the quiet hours of the night. Now, in the harsh, unforgiving light of day, those words disintegrated into nothing but empty, foul garbage, a calculated lullaby designed to keep me blind while he stripped away my life, my trust, and my security. With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone resting in the cup holder. I woke the screen and there we were. My lock screen was a snapshot from our wedding day. David was smiling his signature, effortless smile, his fingers locked tightly around mine, projecting a promise of eternal protection. A wave of profound disgust, hot and acidic, welled up from the depths of my stomach. Looking at his handsome, familiar face now felt like looking at a venomous snake that had nested in my bed. My thumb hovered over the screen, and with a swift, decisive swipe, I stripped the image away, replacing it with a solid, bottomless black wallpaper. From that precise moment, the man I had loved, the husband I had cherished for years, was dead. He did not exist anymore. His memory was buried under that black screen. In his place stood an adversary, a cold-blooded enemy named David, and I was going to war. I shifted the car into drive and steered into the flow of traffic, my target clear. His company. I needed to speak directly to his boss, Director Anna. The grand, elaborate fairy tale he had spun so effortlessly about his high-stakes Tokyo business trip needed to meet its end. I wanted to tear down the stage he had built. I wanted to see what kind of pathetic, naked creature David would have left when his carefully crafted mask was violently ripped from his face. David's office was housed within a towering modern skyscraper of steel and reflective glass, a monolith that seemed to pierce the overcast sky. I parked, stepped out into the crisp air, and walked through the rotating glass doors of the lobby. I stopped for a moment, closing my eyes, taking a long, deep, grounding breath to steady the trembling in my chest. I had to compose myself. I was not there to create a hysterical scene, nor to play the victim who begs for pity. I was there to play a role, the part of a deeply concerned, loving, and slightly frantic wife desperately trying to reach her husband. It would be a flawless, devastating performance, designed specifically to expose his monumental lie. The receptionist, a young woman who had seen me visit David on several occasions, looked up from her computer and offered a warm, polite smile. "Good afternoon, Eleanor. What a pleasant surprise. Are you here to see David?" I forced a soft, slightly weary smile onto my face, keeping my posture elegant and composed. "Good afternoon. Actually, I know he is out of the office, but I am actually here to see Director Anna. I have a rather urgent, personal matter to discuss with her." It was a calculated lie, designed to bypass the corporate gatekeepers. I didn't have an appointment, of course, but as the wife of one of her key department heads, I knew Anna's professional courtesy and personal curiosity would grant me a few precious minutes of her time. I took the elevator up to the executive floor, the quiet hum of the lift matching the steady, cold rhythm of my beating heart. Stepping out onto the plush carpeted hallway, I walked toward the director's office and knocked softly on the heavy mahogany door. From inside, a crisp, commanding voice called out, "Come in." I turned the brass handle and stepped inside. Director Anna was leaning over a mountain of paperwork at her expansive desk, the soft lamplight catching the silver in her hair. She looked up, her expression shifting instantly to surprise as she slid her reading glasses down her nose. "Oh, Eleanor. It's you. What on earth brings you here today? Is everything okay? Please come in, have a seat. Can I get you some water or coffee?" I walked in with deliberate, gentle steps, sitting gracefully in the leather chair across from her. I folded my hands neatly in my lap, deliberately lowering my shoulders, making myself look small, fragile, and utterly innocent. "Good afternoon, Anna. I am so incredibly sorry for bursting in on you like this without an appointment. I know how busy you are. It's just, I'm a bit desperate. My husband, David, left in such an absolute rush for his Tokyo trip yesterday morning. In all the chaos of his departure, I completely forgot to ask him for the exact address of the new office in Japan. I need to overnight mail him his daily prescription medication, which he left behind. He left so suddenly, and now his phone is completely switched off. I can only assume he hasn't had a chance to purchase a local SIM card yet. I'm completely unable to reach him, and I'm starting to worry. I was hoping you could help me by giving me the contact information and address for the new branch in Japan. Director Anna did not answer immediately. She simply stared at me, her entire posture freezing. Her eyes, usually so sharp and calculated, widened in absolute, unmasked shock. She slowly took off her glasses entirely, setting them down on her desk, her brow furrowing deeply as if she were trying to translate a foreign language she couldn't comprehend. "What Tokyo?" she asked, her voice dropping to a bewildered whisper. "Are you telling me David went to Japan?" This was my cue. I let my eyes widen, mirroring her confusion, letting a flicker of sudden frantic panic wash over my features. "Yes. He told me the board was sending him on an urgent, advanced training program, and to manage a newly established branch in Tokyo for the next 4 years. He packed his bags and left yesterday morning." "Is something wrong?" Director Anna let out a strange, hollow, completely humorless laugh. The air in the room instantly grew cold, and her tone turned dead serious, stripped of all corporate pleasantries. "Eleanor, are you absolutely sure about what you are telling me right now? Because let me be perfectly clear. This company does not have a branch in Tokyo. We have never had a branch in Tokyo, and even if we were planning a project there, David is not the caliber of employee who would be selected to lead it. Just yesterday, before he left, he submitted an emergency request for 2 weeks of paid time off. On his official HR form, he stated under oath that his wife was suffering from a sudden life-threatening illness. He claimed he needed to stay home immediately to provide full-time care for her, and that he was preparing to take her to a specialized medical clinic in Boston for urgent, aggressive treatment. For a moment the world stopped spinning. I sat utterly frozen in my chair, the words washing over me like a bucket of icy, suffocating water. A terrible, crushing weight settled on my chest. Seriously ill. He had used my health, my physical well-being, my very life as a convenient, disposable excuse to cover up his sickening predatory games. He had literally cursed me with a fatal disease in the eyes of his employers, burying me alive in his lies, just so he could secure 2 weeks of uninterrupted, paid freedom to run away and play in the sun with his mistress. The sheer monstrous audacity of it sent a wave of roaring, boiling blood through my veins. My fingernails dug deep into the palms of my hands as I fought down the urge to scream. But I could not let the mask slip. Holding back the storm, I let out a sharp, ragged gasp of pure shock and devastating sorrow. I forced my eyes to fill with tears, my voice trembling with a perfect mix of vulnerability and heartbreak. "Really? He told you I was sick? But I'm right here. I'm perfectly healthy, Anna. I'm working, I'm fine. Why? Why would he say something so horrible about me?" Director Anna was a highly intelligent, sharp-witted woman. Watching my genuine, visceral reaction and piecing together the staggering, irreconcilable contradictions in David's stories, the puzzle pieces immediately fell into place for her. Her face softened with a mixture of professional outrage and deep womanly empathy. She pushed her chair back, stood up, and walked around the massive mahogany desk. She stopped beside my chair, leaning down to gently squeeze my trembling shoulder in a gesture of profound comfort. "Eleanor, please take a breath and try to calm down. I am telling you officially, as the director of this department, there is no Tokyo trip. There is no Japanese assignment. The fact that he lied to you and the fact that he used this company's policies to commit fraud is a massive violation of professional ethics. He definitely went somewhere, but it wasn't for us." Director Anna's voice, usually a model of corporate decorum, carried a dangerous, low vibration of absolute finality. I nodded slowly, letting the tears that had been prickling behind my eyelids finally spill over, tracing hot, stinging paths down my cheeks. This time they were not the manufactured tears of a victim seeking sympathy. They were the bitter, burning tears of sheer humiliation. The reality of his betrayal pressed down on my chest like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe. "I drove him to the airport myself," I whispered, my voice trembling as the sheer absurdity of my own devotion washed over me. "I kissed him goodbye, wishing him a safe flight. But this morning I found out his credit card was used to buy expensive jewelry right here in New York. Anna, he cheated on me. He lied to me, he lied to the company, and he even lied to his elderly parents, using them as a shield for his deceit. Director Anna sighed, a deep, heavy sound of profound disappointment, and shook her head in slow disbelief. What absolute nerve, she murmured, her eyes hardening into steel. I never expected this level of duplicity from him. Don't worry, Eleanor. I will have the HR department initiate a comprehensive, forensic audit of all his accounts, expenses, and active files immediately. If he dared to defraud this company as well, I promise you I will not let it slide. As for your personal family issues, take the time you need to handle them calmly. If you require any official documentation or support from our end, you only have to ask. I thanked her in a quiet, barely audible whisper, gathered my belongings and stepped out of the office. Walking out of the glass-doored sanctuary of her suite, the New York sky visible through the massive lobby windows looked heavy, bruised, and aggressively gray. The glittering illusion of my marriage had shattered, and in its place, everything was suddenly crystal clear. There was no prestigious Tokyo business trip, no bright, ambitious future waiting for us on the horizon. There was only a cowardly, traitorous professional liar who was currently blowing through my hard-earned savings, using my sweat and tears to build elaborate castles in the sky with another woman. David had foolishly burned every single bridge behind him, leaving nothing but ashes. He had spent years under the comforting delusion that I was merely a naive, easily manipulated woman who existed only to nod, smile, and absorb his mother's endless criticisms without a peep. He was dead wrong. When a woman is pushed past her limits and backed into a corner, her sleeping vengeance awakens with a force far more destructive than any hurricane. My hands were perfectly steady as I grabbed my phone, pulled up my contacts and dialed my attorney. Michael, I said, my voice dropping to a cool, unwavering whisper. Let's do it right now. I want every single joint account, asset and fund frozen immediately. I want him to find himself without a single, solitary dime left in his pocket when he reaches for his wallet. Let's see how long his grand, passionate true love lasts when he is completely broke and begging. I hung up and walked away, the sharp rhythmic click of my high heels against the polished marble lobby floor sounding cold, metallic, and absolutely decisive. The game had finally begun, and I was no longer playing by his rules. The following morning, I arrived at the office with a completely transformed state of mind. If in the past my thoughts had been constantly fractured by domestic anxieties, worrying about what elaborate meal to cook for dinner, stressing over whether my husband would find fault with it, or dreading the inevitable dramatic fits my overbearing in-laws would throw over the slightest perceived slight, now my focus was laser-sharp, narrowed down to two absolute priorities: my professional career and ultimate justice. I chose my armor carefully. An impeccably tailored, sharp white pantsuit that commanded authority, paired with a bold blood crimson lipstick that felt like war paint. I walked into the grand conference room with the steady, unyielding stride of a seasoned general entering a battlefield. Today was the culmination of months of grueling work. A major, high-stakes pitch with key foreign clients to secure the next quarter's multi-million-dollar contract, a project into which I had poured my entire heart, mind, and soul. The presentation was proceeding flawlessly. The atmosphere in the room was electric, and I was standing confidently by the whiteboard, eloquently breaking down our complex market penetration strategy, when my phone suddenly began to vibrate relentlessly on the polished mahogany table. I cast a brief, sidelong glance at the illuminated screen. The caller ID flashed with a familiar, dreaded name: my mother-in-law. Without breaking my stride, I swiftly declined the call, slid the device to the edge of the table, and continued my presentation with absolute composure. Yet, barely a minute later, the phone buzzed against the wood again, followed by 5 more desperate, consecutive vibrations. Teresa was chain calling me, a frantic barrage of alerts. The foreign clients, noticing the persistent interruption, looked at me with polite, sympathetic expressions. I offered them a graceful, apologetic smile, murmured a brief excuse, and stepped out into the hushed, carpeted hallway to answer it, a tiny residual flicker of human concern making me wonder if there actually was a genuine emergency this time. The moment I pressed the screen to answer, a piercing, ear-splitting screech erupted from the receiver. violently assaulting my eardrum and echoing sharply off the quiet, sterile walls of the corridor. Eleanor. Eleanor, you need to get home right this second. Teresa wailed, her voice climbing to an agonizing theatrical pitch. Your father-in-law is having a horrific seizure. He is going to die right here on the floor. He fell, he is foaming at the mouth, it is awful. Hurry up and get here to take him to the emergency room. I am far too old and weak. How on earth am I supposed to lift him up? Teresa's voice was transitionally shrill, vibrating with a high-octane panic, but beneath the frantic facade, my finely tuned ears could easily detect the hollow, exaggerated drama of a woman accustomed to staging crises to demand attention. If Richard's medical condition was truly so critical and life-threatening, the first, most basic instinct of any rational human being would be to dial 911 immediately for an ambulance, rather than calling a daughter-in-law who was currently at her workplace over an hour away. Maintaining a perfectly calm, icy composure, I asked in a measured, level tone, "What exactly happened to Dad, Mom? Where is he right now?" This only caused Teresa to scream even louder, her voice cracking with manufactured outrage. "He is lying right here on the living room floor, helpless. It must be his blood pressure. You are so incredibly cold-hearted, Eleanor. Your husband leaves for a business trip, and you cannot even fulfill your basic, wifely duty to care for his elderly parents. Get your self-centered self over here right this minute." I slowly lifted my wrist and looked down at my watch. From my Midtown office building to their Upper East Side apartment was at least a 4 or 5 minute drive, even in the absolute best traffic conditions, and realistically much longer. If Richard was genuinely suffering from a massive stroke or a fatal seizure, he would undoubtedly be dead long before I could even unlock their heavy front door. But then a vivid image flashed in my mind from this morning before I had left for work. Richard was sitting comfortably at the dining table, robustly drinking his black coffee and aggressively inhaling 2 massive, towering plates of fried eggs and buttered toast. He looked perfectly healthy with rosy cheeks, his face filled with the robust color of a man who had just devoured a feast rather than one standing on the precipice of a medical crisis. Furthermore, the pristine blister pack of his blood pressure medication lay on the polished marble countertop, completely untouched. He was a man of meticulous, almost obsessive habits. He never, under any circumstances, forgot his morning dose. It was his daily ritual, his small concession to aging. The untouched foil was a silent, damning confession. In that quiet moment of realization, a cold, crystalline clarity settled over me. This was not an emergency. It was another meticulously staged performance, a grotesque piece of domestic theater designed to yank my leash and force me back to the house to bow before her authority. Or perhaps worse, Teresa simply wanted to sabotage my career, to execute a petty display of dominance. She wanted to prove to herself and to me that with a single shrill telephone call, she possessed the power to make me drop everything and ruin my life. She wanted me to abandon a critical, career-defining meeting, to panic and sprint through the chaotic Midtown traffic, only to arrive home and find her husband groaning with practiced misery on the sofa, demanding that I drop to my knees and spend the afternoon simmering homemade soup to soothe his imaginary ailments. I closed my eyes, took a long, slow breath, letting the cool air steady my racing pulse. I refused to play my assigned role in her twisted game. I would not be the lamb led to her sacrificial altar. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, my voice dropping into a register of absolute, unshakable calm. "Mom, listen to me very carefully. I am currently standing outside a massive, high-stakes meeting with the CEO. I cannot leave this floor, not even for a single minute. If I walk out now, my contract will be terminated before I even reach the lobby. And if I am fired, that means we lose the very income that secures the lease on that beautiful Upper East Side apartment you sleep in." I could hear the sharp, venomous intake of her breath on the other end, the gathering storm of curses she was preparing to hurl at my insolence. But I didn't give her the satisfaction of the first blow. I cut her off, my tone shifting to one of decisive, authoritative concern. "But do not worry, Mom. I will handle this immediately. I am dialing 911 right now. They will dispatch an emergency medical team directly to the apartment. They are trained professionals unlike me. They will arrive with oxygen, stretchers, cardiac monitors, and the expertise to administer first aid on the spot before rushing Dad to the nearest emergency room. Do not move him. Stay exactly where you are and wait for the sirens. Without giving her a single second to argue or retract her lies, I pressed the red button, cutting the connection with a satisfying click. Instantly, I dialed those 3 fateful digits. 911. When the emergency dispatcher answered, I adopted a voice of breathless, controlled panic. I gave them the prestigious Upper East Side address and recounted every single terrifying detail Teresa had fed me. The foaming at the mouth, the sudden collapse, the unresponsive state, the history of high blood pressure. I painted a picture so dire, so starkly life-threatening, that the operator immediately classified it as a Code 3 emergency. I wanted the sirens wailing and the lights flashing. I wanted a spectacle that no co-op board could ignore. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, smoothed down the front of my tailored blazer, and took a deep centering breath. When I crossed the threshold back into the boardroom, the tension in my shoulders had vanished, replaced by a cold, brilliant focus. I smiled warmly at the assembled executives, murmured a graceful apology for the brief interruption, and stepped back up to the projector screen. I delivered the rest of my presentation with a commanding, electric energy that held the room captive, securing nod after nod of approval from the CEO. Exactly 20 minutes later, as the meeting was wrapping up, the familiar, low hum of my phone vibrated against my thigh. I excused myself once more, stepping into the quiet sanctuary of the carpeted corridor. The screen displayed an unrecognized, official-looking number. I swiped to answer. Is this the relative of the patient, Richard? A gruff, professional voice asked over the crackle of a radio. We're with FDNY EMS. We've arrived at the address you provided, but we are currently locked out. No one is answering the door. The building's doorman buzzed the intercom, and someone finally picked up, but they claimed we had the wrong apartment and immediately hung up the phone. A slow, triumphant smile bloomed across my face in the empty hallway. It was exactly as I had anticipated. The grand performance had collapsed under the weight of its own reality. When the flashing red and blue lights of a massive ambulance pulled up to the curb of their ultra-exclusive, fiercely private luxury building, Teresa must have felt the earth give way beneath her feet. The shame of having the neighbors peer through their sheer curtains, the horror of being caught in a monstrous, manipulative lie, and above all her pathological aversion to spending a single penny of her own money on a massive unsubsidized ambulance bill. It had thrown her into a blind panic. I let out a soft, theatrical gasp, my voice instantly morphing into a tremulous, desperate plea of faux concern. Oh dear God, no. Poor thing. My mother-in-law must be completely paralyzed by shock. She gets so flustered in emergencies, she's probably terrified to open the door. Please, you have to knock harder. Call out to her. Tell her Eleanor is the one who sent you. If she still doesn't open, please don't hesitate. Ask the building superintendent to use the master key and unlock the door immediately. My father-in-law might be slipping away on the floor in there. Every second counts. I knew Teresa better than she knew herself. Her entire identity was built on a fragile facade of upper-class respectability. To have her neighbors witness her being dragged into a public scandal, or worse, to have the building's superintendent forcefully unlock her door to find her dying husband perfectly fine, would be a social death sentence. My trap was perfectly sprung. Scarcely 5 minutes had passed before my phone lit up with Teresa's contact name. When I answered, the venom and audacity that usually dripped from her tongue were entirely absent. Instead, her voice sounded withered, dry, and thoroughly defeated, like autumn leaves scraping against concrete. Eleanor, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sheer mortification. We don't need the ambulance anymore. Please tell them to go away. Your father is fine. It wasn't a stroke. His blood sugar must have just dipped slightly. I gave him a small glass of orange juice and he's already sitting up good as new. Just call them off. Tell them to leave. The sirens. The whole floor is going to hear them. We are going to be the laughingstock of the entire building. I let a cold, icy silence stretch over the line before I responded. When I spoke, my voice was a masterclass in detached, unyielding concern. How on earth did that happen, Mom? Just a few minutes ago, you screamed into the phone that he was foaming at the mouth, collapsed helpless on the hardwood floor. The health of an elderly man is nothing to trifle with. The paramedics are already at your door. They are the experts. For peace of mind, they must examine him thoroughly. If anything were to happen to Dad because we turned away medical help, I would never ever be able to forgive myself. I flatly, resolutely refused to cancel the emergency call. Left with absolutely no avenue of escape, Teresa was forced to turn the heavy brass lock, open the door, and admit the team of paramedics into her pristine, antique-filled sanctuary. Under the watchful, curious eyes of the building's lobby staff, the whispering doorman, and a few nosy neighbors who had conveniently stepped into the hallway to investigate the commotion, the emergency crew marched in with their heavy equipment. They unwrapped their sterile gear and began checking Richard's vitals right there on the living room sofa. The medical verdict was swift and undeniable. The man was in flawless health. His blood pressure registered a textbook-perfect reading. His pulse was steady, his lungs were clear, and his vitals resembled those of a man half his age in peak physical condition. There was no foam, no stroke, no crisis. Only the hot, flushed face of a husband caught red-handed in his wife's desperate bid for attention. The lead paramedic, thoroughly unimpressed by the domestic drama and visibly annoyed by the misuse of emergency services, delivered a sharp, blistering reprimand to both of them for fabricating a life-threatening crisis and wasting precious city resources. Shrunk down, humiliated, and utterly stripped of her pride, Teresa was forced to sign the official dispatch forms, acknowledging the call, and was left dreading the bill. Thoroughly humiliated, I got home that night to a deafening silence. The car ride back had been a suffocating vacuum of unspoken resentment, the heavy weight of exposed lies pressing down on us like a physical force. Teresa's fingers had gripped her purse so tightly that her knuckles turned a stark, bloodless white, her mind clearly racing with the impending financial toll of the emergency dispatch she had so foolishly engineered. When the heavy wooden door of the apartment finally clicked shut behind us, the silence that greeted me was not peaceful. It was a hostile, ringing emptiness. Richard was grumbling in front of the TV, the flickering blue light of the screen casting distorted, grotesque shadows across his bitter face. He muttered incoherent complaints under his breath, adjusting his posture with a sudden, feigned frailty that no longer carried any weight or garnered any sympathy. Beside him, Teresa glared at me with a venomous intensity, her eyes burning with a silent fury that threatened to incinerate the very air between us. Yet she didn't scream. She didn't launch into her usual tirade of shrill curses and theatrical gasps for air. The fierce, manipulative matriarch had been utterly silenced by the realization that her armor had cracked. She looked at me and finally saw the truth. I was no longer the submissive, obedient daughter-in-law she could bend, break, and manipulate at her whim. The naive girl who prioritized their comfort over her own sanity was gone. I had used her own elaborate fake medical emergency to teach her a harsh, unforgettable lesson, turning her favorite weapon of guilt back upon her with surgical precision. Without uttering a single word, I walked past them, feeling the heavy gaze of their collective resentment burning into my back. I went to my bedroom, shed the suffocating layers of my daytime clothes, and slipped into comfortable loose loungewear, a literal shedding of the skin they had forced me to wear. When I walked back into the kitchen, I completely ignored their presence. I filled a small pot with water, set it on the stove, and made myself a simple box of instant mac and cheese. The ordinary mundane act of stirring the bright yellow cheese powder into the steaming pasta felt strangely therapeutic, a quiet ritual of self-preservation. I didn't ask about my father-in-law's health. I didn't offer a polite inquiry or a comforting word. I knew with absolute certainty backed by professional medical vitals that he was healthier than me, his heart beating with the stubborn strength of a man who had never known real struggle. My cold, unyielding demeanor was a silent, unwritten declaration of war. No more manipulation. No more orchestrated crises. No more fake illnesses used as leverage to hold my life hostage. From that day forward, the power dynamic in this household had shifted permanently. Everyone would play by my rules. 3 agonizing days passed in that icy stalemate, a period of quiet preparation and heavy anticipation. On the 3rd day since David's supposed business departure, the tension in the apartment had become almost unbearable, prompting me to escape into the crisp autumn air of the city. I scheduled a meeting with Paul at our favorite quiet coffee shop nestled in the heart of Tribeca. It was a rustic, dimly lit sanctuary, filled with the comforting aroma of freshly ground espresso beans and the low, soothing hum of distant conversations. Paul had arrived early, a testament to his unwavering loyalty. He was sitting in a secluded corner booth, his broad shoulders hunched forward, his face cast in a shadow of profound gravity. Thanks to his highly specialized career in technology and cybersecurity, Paul possessed the rare, formidable capability to unearth digital footprints that remained entirely invisible to the average citizen. He understood the language of the internet, the hidden trails of data that people foolishly believed they had erased. The moment I slid into the leather booth opposite him, he didn't offer the usual light-hearted pleasantries. Instead, he reached into his bag and silently handed me a sleek black tablet. His eyes locked onto mine with a look of deep protective sorrow. On the screen was a crystal-clear, high-resolution photograph that seemed to vibrate with a terrible truth. A buddy of mine took this by total coincidence yesterday morning at Kahului Airport in Maui, Paul explained, his voice low and steady. He let out a sharp, bitter snort, shaking his head in disbelief. He saw this couple standing at the terminal, thought the guy looked way too familiar to be a stranger, and snapped a quick picture just to be absolutely sure. "Look closely, Ellie." I held my breath, the air freezing in my lungs as I stared down at the glowing image. There was no room for denial, no comforting illusion of a mistake. The man in the photograph, sporting a loud, vibrant Hawaiian shirt patterned with tropical leaves, crisp white shorts and a jaunty fedora, was undeniably David, my husband. He bore absolutely no resemblance to the exhausted, high-strung corporate executive who had claimed he was boarding a grueling flight to Tokyo for high-stakes business negotiations. He looked relaxed, radiant, and entirely untethered from the reality of his life back home. Beside him stood a young, striking woman clad in a daring, revealing backless sundress that exposed a vast expanse of golden skin. She was leaning heavily against David's shoulder, her head tilted back as she smiled widely, her laughter almost audible through the glass screen. It was Isabella, the ambitious former intern who had once smiled so sweetly in our living room. They were standing comfortably at the marble check-in desk of a massive, ultra-luxurious six-star resort nestled in the exclusive enclave of Waiea, Maui. David's arm was wrapped tightly, possessively around her slender waist, pulling her close to his side, while Isabella's delicate hand rested flat against his chest in a gesture of intimate ownership. But it wasn't their blatant, sickening display of affection that made my blood instantly boil, sending a fierce rush of heat straight to my temples. It was something else, a blinding glint of light reflecting off a luxury item resting on Isabella's left wrist. I pinched the screen, zooming in closer and closer until the pixels resolved into a devastatingly clear image of a Rolex Datejust, its dial completely encrusted with a constellation of glittering diamonds. I remembered a month ago when David had walked through our front door, practically glowing with pride as he bragged about securing a large quarterly bonus. He had looked me dead in the eye and spun a convincing tale about wanting to purchase a sophisticated, prestigious watch to help him look more distinguished and formidable during executive board meetings. I had believed every single word of his lie. I had even felt a genuine swell of pride and happiness for his professional success. It turned out, with agonizing irony, that he had used our hard-earned joint savings to purchase a matching set, a handsome piece for himself, and this dazzling women's Rolex, the very timepiece I had secretly dreamed of owning for years, but had repeatedly denied myself, sacrificing my own desires to ensure we had a substantial safety net. Now, that glittering symbol of my self-denial was draped carelessly around the wrist of his mistress. My vision momentarily went dark with a blinding, suffocating fury. A massive wave of cold betrayal and profound, gut-wrenching humiliation washed over me, threatening to drown my senses. David wasn't just stepping outside of our marriage, he was actively looting our life together. He was taking the very best, the most valuable assets of our family's hard-earned wealth, and handing them over like cheap trinkets to another woman. Paul watched my reaction, his eyes filled with a cautious, deeply empathetic concern. "Ellie, are you okay?" he asked softly, leaning across the table. When I didn't immediately answer, he sighed, pointing to the data beneath the photo. "There's more, Ellie." He booked a sprawling oceanfront villa at the exclusive Waiea Emerald Resort for a full 7 days. The nightly room rate alone is a staggering $5,000. The reservation is under David's name, paid for with his primary account. $5,000 a night. For 7 nights, the lodging alone totaled $35,000. When you factor in the first-class round-trip flights, the opulent fine dining, and the exorbitant jewelry, this single tropical getaway cost at least $50,000. Meanwhile, back in our cramped, suffocating apartment in the city, my mother-in-law was constantly screaming at me, degrading me over the microscopic fluctuations in the cost of weekly groceries. David had spent months complaining about the company cutting back on executive bonuses, using it as an excuse to give me less money for our monthly mortgage payments, forcing me to budget down to the last penny. Yet here he was far away in paradise, showering his young mistress with unimaginable breathtaking wealth. I closed my eyes for a single quiet moment, forcing the hot, angry tears back down. I wiped the corners of my eyes with a trembling hand, then looked up at Paul with a face carved from absolute, unshakable resolve. "I'm fine," I whispered, my voice steadying with a cold, sharp edge. "Thank you so much, Paul. You have no idea what this means to me. This photo and the official hotel reservation details are absolute gold for the divorce proceedings." Paul gave a firm, supportive nod, a faint, determined smile touching his lips. "I've archived every single piece of digital evidence, Ellie, including her recent Instagram posts complete with the embedded geolocations. Her profile was technically set to friends only, but I managed to secure high-resolution screenshots before she could suspect anything. She's actively bragging to her followers that her future husband planned this early honeymoon just for them. Future husband, honeymoon. Those words were salt in my wounds, burning through the raw, open lacerations of my dignity. Every syllable felt like a physical blow, a mocking echo of the life I thought I was building, now revealed to be a fragile house of cards. What promises had David whispered into her ear while he was thousands of miles away? Had he painted a picture of a gilded future, promising to discard his loyal, long-suffering wife like an outdated piece of furniture, so they could run off into their sun-drenched paradise? The sheer injustice of it choked me. For years, I had shrunk myself to fit into the margins of his life. I had played the role of an unpaid house elf, quietly managing the household, sacrificing my own peace to tend to his demanding parents, all while he lived it up on our hard-earned security. My fingers curled into a fist so tight that my nails bit painfully into the soft flesh of my palm. The sharp sting of physical pain was grounding, anchoring me to my sanity in a moment where my world was collapsing. "All right, David. If you want to play the generous billionaire at a luxury tropical resort, if you want to parade around with your stolen wealth, I will show you what it feels like to be completely, utterly broke." I turned to Paul, my eyes burning with the cold, calculating light. "Help me with just one more thing," I said, my voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of an iron decree. "Keep a constant microscopic eye on all his social media activity. Don't miss a single post, a single tag, or a single story. I am heading directly to Michael Sterling's office right now. It is time to shut off the golden tap once and for all." I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor, and carefully smoothed down the fabric of my blazer. I took a deep, steadying breath. "I am Eleanor, Director of Marketing. I am a woman who has built strategies, navigated crises, and commanded boardrooms. I would use every single ounce of my intellect, my professional cunning, and my strategic mind to get the absolute justice I deserved." That photo in Maui was not just evidence. It was David's one-way ticket out of my life, a permanent expulsion from the kingdom he had betrayed. The law office of Michael Sterling was a hive of activity that afternoon, filled with the low hum of ringing phones and the rustle of legal briefs. Yet, the moment I walked through the door, Sterling recognized the quiet emergency written across my face and prioritized my case immediately. He ushered me into his quiet, oak-paneled office, away from the chaos. Without saying a word, I laid the evidence out on his heavy wooden desk like a winning hand of cards. First came the crystalline photo from Maui, followed by the detailed hotel reservation confirmations, and finally, the copy of the receipt for the luxury Rolex purchased on Fifth Avenue mere hours before his flight. The attorney put on his reading glasses, reviewing every single document with a slow, meticulous precision. His eyes moved back and forth, absorbing the dates, the amounts, and the names. Finally, he looked up, a grim but satisfied nod gracing his face. "Excellent work, Eleanor," he murmured, his voice rich with professional appreciation. "With this level of detailed evidence, we have undeniable, ironclad grounds to request an emergency injunction." David's recent actions are a textbook demonstration of an intent to dissipate marital assets before a divorce. The $90,000 wire transfers to Isabella, coupled with this fraudulent business trip to Hawaii. It is a rock-solid legal foundation. We don't just have a case, we have the upper hand. I sat across from him in the leather chair, my back perfectly straight, my posture exuding an icy composure. My voice did not tremble. It was steady, measured, and resolute. "Michael, I want to file the divorce petition unilaterally today," I commanded, each word dropping like a heavy stone. "And I want the judge to sign an order to freeze every single bank account under David's name. I want his checking, his savings, his brokerage accounts, all of them locked. I also want a lien placed on his BMW immediately, so he cannot try to liquidate it for quick cash. I want him entirely paralyzed." Sterling paused, looking at me across the desk. His gaze held a complex mixture of professional sympathy and profound respect for the steel in my spine. "Eleanor," he said softly, leaning forward, "have you thought this all the way through? You must understand that once we file this petition, and the judge signs the temporary restraining order on his assets, there is no turning back. There will be no reconciliation, no quiet retreat. Your marriage is effectively over, even if the formal legal process takes months or years to finalize." I let out a bitter, humorless smile. "Going back?" I asked, the words tasting like ash. He burned that bridge to the ground the very second he boarded that flight to Hawaii with that woman, using our money to buy her devotion. I don't regret a single step I am taking today. My only true regret is the sheer amount of time, love, and effort I wasted on his ungrateful, deceitful family. Do it all, Michael. Do it as fast as humanly possible. I want his credit cards to be nothing but useless, worthless pieces of plastic by tonight, or by tomorrow morning at the absolute latest. The attorney nodded, the hesitation vanishing from his eyes. He reached over and immediately buzzed his paralegal, instructing her to prioritize our emergency paperwork above all else. For the next 3 hours, I sat in that office and watched the legal machinery grind into motion. I watched the words materialize on the glowing computer screen. Petition for dissolution of marriage, ex parte motion for temporary restraining order on assets. These cold, clinical, and sterile legal terminologies, which once would have terrified me, had now become my chosen weapons of war. We worked tirelessly, checking every date, verifying every account number, and tightening every loophole. When the final draft was printed, I took the pen and signed my name with a fierce, unwavering determination. My signature had never looked so beautiful, so sharp, or so entirely free. It was no longer just a signature on a document. It was the ink of my liberation, the first day of the rest of my life. Afterward, Sterling and I walked briskly to the courthouse, our coats billowing in the rising wind. Thanks to our meticulous preparation, the undeniable urgency of the situation, and the very real, demonstrable risk of David liquidating our shared wealth, the judge granted the motion with surprising speed. We quickly posted the required bond, utilizing the funds from my personal savings account, a small price to pay for total victory. By the very end of the day, the court order was officially issued. It was a powerful, commanding document bearing a heavy, official state seal that legally ordered all financial institutions to immediately freeze David's accounts. Another copy was dispatched directly to the DMV to freeze the title of his beloved BMW. Holding that physical piece of paper in my hands, I felt an enormous, crushing weight lift off my shoulders, allowing me to draw a full breath for the first time in days. The financial life support was cut. The money flow was dead. David would no longer be able to withdraw a single dime of our joint funds to spoil his mistress or fund his double life. I walked out of the courthouse steps, feeling the crisp air hit my face. The late afternoon sun was setting, bathing the entire public square in a brilliant golden light that made the world seem clean and full of possibility again. I pulled out my phone and dialed Paul. "It's done," I said, a quiet triumph in my tone. "The trap is fully set. Now we just wait for the rat to bite." On the other end of the line, Paul let out a low, appreciative laugh. "Brilliant, Eleanor. Absolutely brilliant. There's going to be a massive financial hurricane hitting Maui tonight. You need to go get some rest now. Save your energy because you're going to need it for the final boss fight with his parents back at the house." Mentioning my in-laws made me grimace, but I wasn't afraid of them anymore. The paralyzing dread that used to knot my stomach at the mere thought of their critical glares and endless demands had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline resolve. I held all the cards now. An entire deck of undeniable truths and legal declarations. The apartment we shared, the very stage upon which they had played their petty games of domestic dominance, was technically registered in both my name and David's. But the law, like my patience, looks at the ledger of reality. The vast, overwhelming majority of the equity belonged to me and my parents. It was our sweat, our savings, and our dreams that had built the foundation of this home. I was absolutely not going to let them squat in my territory a second longer, turning my sanctuary into a breeding ground for their entitlement. I drove home through the deepening twilight, the steering wheel firm beneath my hands, a profound sense of victory warming my chest. David, you thought you were the smartest guy in the room. You genuinely believed you could string me along, weaving a tapestry of lies and manipulation while you lived the high life, indulging in a gilded, secret world of luxury. How tragically wrong you were. You had forgotten a fundamental truth of human nature. When a woman's love runs completely dry, when the last drop of devotion evaporates under the heat of betrayal, she does not merely walk away. She becomes a force of nature, more calculated and utterly ruthless than any man could ever dream of being. Enjoy your last decadent, luxury dinner tonight in your tropical paradise, because tomorrow the bank accounts will be frozen, the illusion will shatter, and you will literally be reduced to a beggar. I arrived at the apartment in the early evening. The moment I unlocked the door and stepped across the threshold, a heavy, offensive wave of greasy takeout food assailed my senses. The air was thick, stagnant, and smelled of cheap frying oil. The living room looked like an absolute war zone, a desecration of the home I had painstakingly curated. Empty beer cans sat sweating on the delicate wood surfaces, and chicken bones were scattered carelessly across the glass coffee table like the remains of some barbaric feast. The television was blaring at an obnoxious volume, the erratic lights of MTV casting garish, flickering shadows across the walls. Richard was slouched deeply into the cushions of the sofa, looking thoroughly beat up, disheveled, and exhausted. He was casually smoking a cigarette, completely indifferent to the world, letting the gray ash fall directly onto my expensive custom hardwood floors I had polished with my own hands. On the adjacent sofa, Teresa was sprawled out like a queen in her court, tapping away on her iPad and erupting into loud, grating bursts of laughter. Seeing me walk in, they didn't even bother to say hello, let alone make a move to tidy the disgusting mess they had created. To them, I was invisible, a mere utility. Teresa looked me up and down with a sneer that dripped with condescension. "Oh, the big director is finally home," she drawled, her voice laced with venom. "Didn't bother to cook dinner, I see. I guess you wanted to starve your husband's parents to death. We had no choice but to order expensive delivery. It cost us a fortune, not that you'd care." I didn't offer a single word of defense or explanation. The time for words had passed. I walked over to the entertainment console in complete, chilling silence. My movements were slow, deliberate, and heavy with purpose. I grabbed the remote control and, with a single press of my thumb, shut the television off, plunging the room into a sudden, deafening quiet. Before they could even process the silence, I stepped over to Richard, reached down, and snatched the lit cigarette right out from between his stained fingers. In one fluid, aggressive motion, I ground the glowing ember into a nearby ceramic ashtray until it was nothing but black dust. They both stared at me, frozen in absolute shock, completely blindsided by the raw, unyielding aggression radiating from me. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Have you completely lost your mind?" Richard roared, his face rapidly turning a deep, angry red as he struggled to stand. I stood dead in the center of the living room, my posture straight, staring down at them with eyes that had turned into chips of absolute ice. "Excuse me," I said, my voice dangerously calm, cutting through his rage like a scalpel. "But smoking inside is strictly prohibited in this building. A rule I clearly explained to you on day one. And now I have an important announcement to make." Without breaking eye contact, I unzipped my bag, pulled out a crisp, folded piece of paper, and slammed it down onto the messy coffee table, right next to the discarded chicken bones. "This is an official eviction notice drafted and signed by my attorney today," I stated, each word dropping like a heavy stone. "I am legally terminating your stay here. You have exactly 3 days to pack your belongings and vacate this apartment. Teresa's laughter died instantly. Her breath caught in her throat, her chest freezing mid-rise as her eyes practically bugged out of her head in utter disbelief. What on earth are you talking about? She shrieked, her voice cracking. You're kicking us out? This is my son's house. What right do you have to do this, you absolute psycho? I let a cold, mocking smile play at the corners of my lips. The title of this condo is in both our names, but 90% of the down payment came directly from my parents' hard-earned savings. David contributed almost nothing to this place, and I am the sole person paying the mortgage every single month. Your precious son ran off with another woman, and before he left, he emptied our joint accounts and stole our savings. I have absolutely zero moral or legal obligation to house and feed my husband's parents while he is living it up with someone else in luxury. Richard stood up, his entire body trembling with indignation as he pointed a shaky, accusing finger directly at my face. Liar! He spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and denial. David went to Japan on a grueling business trip to provide for us. You're nothing but a cheating wife trying to steal my son's property. I'm calling David right now. He'll come back and throw you out on the street. With agonizing calmness, I reached into my pocket and picked up my phone. I tapped the screen, opening a crystal-clear, high-res photo of David and Isabella basking in the sun in Maui, and shoved the glowing screen right into their startled faces. Take a good hard look, I whispered, the words dripping with satisfaction. Is that your son's Tokyo? That is Maui, Hawaii, and that woman wrapped around him is his mistress. He lied to you about the corporate trip just so he could take his side piece to a luxury resort. He just blew tens of thousands of dollars of stolen money on her, all while dumping his wife at home to babysit you. What do you think about that? Teresa frantically snatched the phone from my grip, her eyes locking onto the bright image. She instantly recognized her son's face, and the beautiful, radiant young woman clinging to his arm on the beach. Every ounce of color drained from Teresa's face, turning her complexion from a furious crimson to a sickly, ghostly white. But then the deep-seated, pathological devotion to her golden child clawed its way back to the surface, overriding any shred of logic. She violently threw the phone back onto the couch and shrieked, her face contorting with desperate venom. Photoshop. I bet it's all Photoshop. You made this whole thing up because you're nothing but a bitter, jealous hag. My son is a good, decent, honorable man. He would never do something like this to us. And even if he did take a vacation to clear his head, so what? A successful man can have a few girlfriends. It's your fault for not keeping your husband happy. And now you have the nerve to kick out his parents. I let out a quiet, bitter laugh from deep within, struck by the sheer, staggering absurdity of their delusion. It was a defense mechanism so grotesque, so completely detached from reality, that it bordered on the theatrical. Even when confronted with the cold, unvarnished truth, with photographic evidence of their son's profound betrayal staring them right in the face, their first instinct was to shield him and cast the stone of shame at me. But my reservoir of patience, once seemingly bottomless, had run completely dry. Think whatever you want, I said, my voice dropping to a calm, chilling register that cut through the hysteria in the room. The truth does not bend to your denials. It doesn't change. I have already filed for divorce, and as of this morning, a judge has officially frozen every single one of David's bank accounts. And as for this condo, I am the legal co-owner. My name is on the deed, and my signature holds the power here. You have exactly 3 days. If you are not gone by then, I will not hesitate to have the sheriff and building security drag your boxes straight to the curb. Without waiting for the poison of their response, I turned on my heel, the fabric of my clothes sweeping through the heavy air, and walked toward my bedroom. I stepped inside, pulled the door shut, and turned the key in the lock. The click of the deadbolt felt like the first real boundary I had drawn in years. Behind that thin wooden barrier, the storm raged on. I could hear Teresa's voice fracturing into desperate wails and venomous curses, punctuated by the dull, violent thud of Richard kicking the coffee table in a useless fit of masculine rage. Almost immediately, the frantic tapping of buttons signaled their attempt to reach David again. Through the plaster of the wall, Teresa's muffled sobs bled into my quiet sanctuary. David, please pick up. Your crazy wife is throwing us out on the street. David. But the only reply was the cold, automated recording of his voicemail. Or perhaps, I thought with a grim twist of my lips, David was simply too occupied enjoying the luxury of room service with his mistress in some high-priced haven to bother with the wreckage he had left behind. That night, as I lay in the dark, the apartment was filled with the low, restless groaning of his parents in the next room, the sound of two people realizing the ground was shifting beneath their feet. Yet, lying there looking up at the shadowed ceiling, I felt no guilt. Not a single ounce of doubt lingered in my chest. I had been weak for far too long, mistaking endurance for strength, and patience for love. It was time to clean house, to sweep away the debris of a life built on lies. On the morning of the fourth day, the sun rose cold and sharp. I took the day off work, not to rest but to reclaim what was mine. I did not return to the apartment alone. When I stepped out of the elevator, I was flanked by a solemn entourage. A sheriff's deputy, 2 uniformed officers from the NYPD, and the building manager, who carried himself with a quiet, uneasy professionalism. We stood in the carpeted hallway outside the front door. From within, the faint, tinny murmur of the television hummed, a mundane domestic sound that felt like an insult. I reached out and rang the bell, the chime echoing through the locked space. I pressed my key fob against the scanner, but when I turned the handle, the door caught. It was secured from the inside by both the heavy deadbolt and the security chain. From the other side of the wood, Richard's voice boomed, thick with a defiant, ugly arrogance. "Don't you dare. I changed the locks. Let's see you try to kick us out now. My son bought this place. I have a right to be here." I did not flinch. I simply turned to the building manager and gave him a curt nod. He stepped forward with the master key override, turning it to disengage the main lock, but the heavy security chain remained taut, keeping the door cracked open just an inch. The deputy reached up and switched on his body camera, its small light blinking to life. I stepped closer to the gap, speaking in a voice that was loud, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Dad, I gave you 3 days, but you chose to refuse my cooperation. This apartment belongs to me. In David's absence, I am the sole legal resident present on the lease. By changing the locks and refusing to vacate, you are now committing criminal trespassing. I have brought law enforcement and building management here today to reclaim my property. If you do not unlatch this door immediately, a locksmith will drill the lock open, and the officers will physically remove you from the premises." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the hallway. No footsteps approached. No latch clicked. I looked at the locksmith waiting beside us and gave him the signal. The high-pitched, metallic shriek of a heavy-duty drill shattered the quiet of the corridor, chewing through the brass lock. 5 agonizing minutes of screeching metal later, the lock gave way with a sharp pop, and the security chain was swiftly snipped with bolt cutters. The door swung open, revealing the living room. There, the Keframs huddled together. On the plush fabric of the sofa sat Richard and Teresa, looking suddenly stripped of their bluster. At the sight of the blue uniforms and the stern, unblinking authority of the law stepping into the foyer, the color drained completely from their faces, leaving them pale with a raw, primal terror. They tried to yell, to summon some final desperate defense, but as their eyes locked onto the glowing lenses of the body cameras and the grim, unyielding expressions of the officers, the words died in their throats. They shut their mouths, reduced to silent, fearful spectators in the very home they had tried to usurp. I pointed a finger toward the hallway, where a stack of cardboard boxes lay waiting. "I hired professional movers. They are here to pack your personal belongings. You will take only your clothes and your immediate personal effects. Every single piece of property that belongs to this apartment, the television, the refrigerator, the decor, stays exactly where it is. Do not attempt to touch them. Everything in this room is being actively recorded." The movers went to work with a clinical, lightning-fast efficiency, showing no regard for the domestic sanctity that had once existed there. Clothes were swept from hangers, prescription pill bottles rattled as they were swept into boxes, toiletries were cleared from the bathroom counters in single motions. Everything that defined their intrusive stay was boxed and sealed in minutes. Throughout the ordeal, Teresa wept openly, the tears leaving salty tracks down her aged face. She muttered a constant stream of venomous curses under her breath, her eyes shooting daggers at me as she hissed the words, calling me a heartless witch. I stood there, arms crossed over my chest, supervising the entire dissolution of their presence. Her insults washed over me like water on stone. They had no power to hurt me anymore. When the final box was taped shut with a harsh, ripping sound, I stepped forward. I held out a white envelope and a folded piece of paper containing a handwritten address. Dad, Mom, despite the cruelty and the utter lack of respect you have shown me, I still possess a shred of basic human decency. This is the address of a cheap motel located in the Bronx, about an hour's drive from here. I have already prepaid your stay for 1 full week. You can remain there until David finally decides to crawl out of his hole and fetch you, or until you manage to arrange a bus ride back to Pennsylvania. And inside this envelope is $1,000 in cash to cover your food and basic expenses. As of this exact second, I have absolutely zero obligations to either of you. His hands trembling with a volatile mixture of wounded pride, white-hot fury, and deep humiliation, Richard reached out, snatched the envelope from my hand, and shoved it deep into his pocket. He shot me a dark, hateful glare, a look so sharp and laced with pure venom that it felt like a physical blow, yet it carried none of the authority he once wielded. With a rough, desperate yank, he pulled Teresa by the arm, her fragile frame stumbling slightly as she tried to keep her balance. "You will pay for this, you snake," he spat, his voice trembling with a toxic mixture of bruised pride and impotent malice, a final hollow threat thrown over his shoulder. I stood frozen at the threshold, watching them shuffle down the dimly lit hallway. They looked incredibly small, almost pathetic, as they dragged their cardboard boxes along the floorboards, the scraping sound echoing like the dying gasps of their parasitic reign over my life. With every step they took away from me, the heavy air in the corridor seemed to clear. When the elevator doors finally slid shut, swallowing them whole, a massive wave of relief washed over me, so intense and sudden that I had to lean against the doorframe to catch my breath. The parasite had been purged. Within the hour, the locksmith arrived. I stood over him as he worked, watching him dismantle the physical remnants of my family's intrusion. He installed a brand new, high-security smart lock, a sleek piece of modern engineering complete with biometric fingerprint access. I watched the digital interface glow to life as I personally wiped every single old key fob and backup code from the system, erasing their access as if they had never existed. When the installation was complete, the sharp, clean beep of the new lock echoed through the quiet foyer. It sounded like a chime of liberation, a physical bell ringing in a new, unblemished chapter of my life. Walking back inside, I looked around. The apartment was vast, empty, clean, and utterly safe. The lingering scent of their presence was gone, replaced by the cool, neutral air of my own sanctuary. My territory was mine again, a fortress where no one could hurt me. But while I was meticulously rebuilding the boundaries of my life in New York, thousands of miles away, David was descending into the absolute darkest hours of his existence in the sun-drenched paradise of Maui. The illusion began to shatter in the middle of a sunlit, oceanfront terrace. David sat at a table draped in white linen, the ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and expensive orchids, waiting to pay for an extravagant lunch of fresh seafood and imported champagne. But when the waiter returned, his polite professional smile had hardened into a mask of cold suspicion. The black titanium credit card had been declined. David, laughing off the embarrassment as a mere technical glitch, handed over another premium card. Declined. Then another. And another. The quiet murmurs of neighboring tables felt like burning needles on his neck. When the hotel management intervened, demanding an alternative form of payment that he simply did not possess, the luxury resort showed its true mercenary face. Within minutes, security escorted him to the front desk, and he found himself locked out of his Ocean View villa, his access revoked in an instant. For Isabella, this was the moment of ultimate clarity. She did not cry, nor did she offer words of comfort. The second she realized the gravy train had violently and permanently derailed, her eyes went cold and calculating. With the practiced efficiency of a seasoned opportunist, she packed her designer bags, zipped up her expensive luggage, and pulled out her phone. She called an Uber, stood up, and abandoned him on the gravel driveway of the resort without a single backward glance, leaving him behind like a piece of discarded trash. David was left standing alone beneath the swaying palm trees of a Hawaiian paradise, a place that now felt more like a beautifully painted prison. He was utterly stranded. His wallet, once a symbol of endless luxury, contained barely any physical cash and was stuffed with useless, declined pieces of plastic. Panicking, he tried calling Isabella, but a cold, automated operator voice informed him that her phone had been disconnected. Desperate, his hands shaking, he dialed his parents, hoping for a lifeline, only to be met with the devastating news of their eviction. His mother's hysterical voice over the receiver detailed how they had been removed by the police and were now huddled in a seedy, dangerous motel in the depths of the Bronx. In that crushing moment, the truth settled over David like a heavy shroud. He had lost absolutely everything. His status, his luxury, his family's standing, all of it had vanished into thin air. He desperately needed to get back to New York, but the glaring, terrifying question remained. How could he possibly buy a ticket home? His first-class round-trip flight had been booked on the very credit card that was now frozen solid. Stranded, sweating profusely under the brutal tropical humidity that now felt suffocating rather than warm, he began to wander aimlessly. He walked until he reached the industrial town of Kahului, far away from the polished resort districts. There, tucked between a dusty auto repair shop and a liquor store, he found a shady, dimly lit pawn shop. Slowly, with trembling fingers, he unclasped the Rolex date just from his wrist. He had bought it for $24,000, a glittering trophy of his perceived success, his absolute pride and joy. He placed it on the scratched glass counter. "How much can you give me for this?" David asked, his voice cracking, his throat dry. The pawn shop owner, a grizzled man with yellowed teeth, picked up the watch and examined it through a small loupe. He turned it over, feeling its weight, and then let out a low, mocking smirk. "It's real, yeah, I'll give you that," the owner said carelessly. "But there is no box and there are no papers. Best I can do is scrap value. $2,000 cash right now." David stared at him in utter disbelief, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Are you joking? I paid $24,000 for this watch just months ago. Look at the craftsmanship. Give me at least $12,000. That's half its value." The owner waved his hand dismissively, pushing the watch back across the glass. "No papers means it could be hot. Could be stolen. $2,000. Take it or leave it, kid. I've got other customers." Starving, his designer shirt soaked in sweat, and utterly broken by the reality of his situation, David gritted his teeth so hard he thought they might shatter. He had no choice. He nodded weakly and accepted the deal. As the owner slid a small, crumpled stack of $100 bills across the counter, David picked them up and felt a wave of intense nausea hit his stomach. Just a few days ago, this exact amount of money was nothing more than the cost of a single extravagant dinner with champagne. Now it was his only lifeline, the wretched price of his survival. He spent the next few hours frantically searching his phone, finally managing to secure a last-minute ticket on a budget airline. The seat was in the very last row, right next to the roaring engines and the smells of the lavatory. To make matters worse, the flight was delayed for 3 grueling hours. David sat in the crowded, chaotic terminal, watching happy couples holding hands, their faces glowing with the warmth of a good vacation. His chest felt incredibly tight, squeezed by a suffocating coil of regret. He closed his eyes, remembering how arrogant and invincible he had felt just days prior, strutting through the terminal at JFK, looking down on the average travelers as if they were beneath him. When he finally boarded the plane, there was no luxury to shield him. He was crammed into a narrow middle seat, squeezed tightly between 2 massive men who took up all the armrest space. For the entire grueling flight, the air was thick with the sound of crying babies and the hum of recycled oxygen. Instead of the delicate filet mignon and vintage champagne he was accustomed to, a flight attendant handed him a tiny, crinkling bag of stale pretzels and a plastic cup of lukewarm tap water. He stared at the salt-crusted pretzels, realizing this was the true taste of his new reality. The plane finally touched down at JFK in the middle of a torrential downpour. The sky was pitch black, and the rain lashed against the windows like gravel. David walked out of the terminal and caught a miserable, expensive ride toward the city. Through the rain-slicked windows of the car, New York looked cold, gray, and utterly unforgiving. The towering skyscrapers that once seemed to celebrate his ambition now looked like jagged, indifferent monoliths. But David knew that the real storm wasn't the weather outside. The true tempest was waiting for him at the end of this ride. far away from the luxury apartment where he had once ruled like a king. His descent from the heights of heaven to the absolute depths of hell, a journey entirely self-inflicted and born of his own hubris, was now complete. The cab finally crawled to a stop, dropping him off on a sketchy, poorly lit street in one of the roughest pockets of the Bronx. Rainwater rushed down the cracked pavement, carrying trash into the gutters. David stood on the sidewalk, his expensive clothes soaked through, staring at the address I had handed to his father. The Stars Motel. It was a wretched, run-down building, its neon sign flickering sporadically with an annoying high-pitched buzz that cut through the sound of the rain. On the ground floor, a noisy, dimly lit dive bar spilled the muffled sounds of slurred arguments and clinking glasses onto the wet street. David took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy door to the lobby. Instantly, his senses were assaulted by the overwhelming, sickening smell of stale beer, old cigarette smoke, and cheap chemical bleach trying to mask decades of filth. He walked up to the bulletproof glass at the front desk and asked the clerk for the room registered under Richard and Teresa's names. The clerk, a tired-looking man with bloodshot eyes, eyed David's soaked designer clothes with deep contempt, spat into a plastic cup, and pointed a lazy finger toward the third floor. David turned and walked up a sticky, dark staircase, the handrail grime-coated and cold under his touch. The air grew heavier with every step, and before he even reached the landing, the muffled, agonizing sound of his mother's weeping reached his ears, a desperate, hollow sound echoing through the narrow hallway. He reached the door and pushed it open. The room was a suffocating 115-square-foot box that smelled of damp carpet and despair. In the corner sat a sagging, spring-worn bed and a cheap plastic dresser with one drawer hanging half open. His father, Richard, once so loud and commanding, was sitting motionless on the edge of a chair, staring blankly at a large, yellowed water stain on the peeling wallpaper. He looked decades older, his shoulders hunched, his spirit completely broken. His mother was curled on the stained mattress, her face buried in a thin pillow, crying hysterically. At the sound of the door opening, Teresa's head snapped up. Seeing her son standing in the doorway, drenched, exhausted, and defeated, she let out a choked gasp. She jumped up from the bed, stumbling forward with her arms outstretched, and grabbed him with a desperate, crushing grip. "David! You're back! Thank God you're back!" she cried out, her voice a shrill, desperate rasp that scraped against the peeling walls of the cramped room. Her fingers, thin and trembling, clawed at his sleeves as if she were drowning and he was her only lifeline. "Look what that psychotic woman did to us. Look what your wife has reduced us to. She threw us out like common garbage, straight into the merciless streets, forcing us into this rotting rat hole of a motel. You cannot let her do this, David. You are a man. You need to teach her a lesson she will never forget. Go out there and get our house back." David stood frozen for an agonizing moment, the suffocating warmth of his mother's desperation pressing against his chest. Slowly, gently, but with a profound fatigue that seemed to seep from his very bones, he peeled her clutching fingers away from his coat. He did not speak. Instead, he let his body fall forward, collapsing heavily onto the sagging, squeaking edge of the mattress. The springs groaned beneath his weight. He looked around, his eyes taking in the dismal reality of his new existence. The water-stained wallpaper peeling like dead skin, the faint, sickening draft of cheap disinfectant, and finally his parents. They looked so incredibly old. The pride that had once defined his father's posture was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, sunken defeat. A wave of suffocating shame, sharp rage, and utter, paralyzing helplessness crashed over him, drowning out any spark of defiance he had left. Richard's chest heaved as he stared at his son, his face a map of deep, angry crevices. "How was Japan, David?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a volatile mixture of fury and betrayal. "Why has your wife suddenly gone mad? She has paraded our family's private life in front of the entire world. She told everyone who ever respected us, that you were hiding away in Hawaii with another woman. She didn't just speak of it. She showed the photos, David. Cold, hard evidence. Look at me and tell me she was lying. Tell me this is all some sick, fabricated nightmare." David could not meet his father's gaze. He let his head fall forward, his chin sinking toward his chest. The silence that filled the small, suffocating room was heavier than any confession. A deafening, suffocating confirmation that shattered the remaining illusions of his family. Teresa gasped, her entire body freezing mid-breath as the weight of that silence registered. "So, it is true," she whispered, her voice barely a thread. Something snapped inside David. The pressure of his secrets, the exhaustion of the journey, and the sheer terror of his collapsing reality erupted. "Yes, it's true," he yelled, his voice cracking with a desperate, defensive bitterness. "I had it all calculated perfectly. It was a seamless plan, a foolproof arrangement. I never, in my wildest dreams, thought Eleanor would figure it out. She was always so trusting, so quiet. But she blocked everything. She froze my accounts, she locked the doors, she filed for divorce before I could even make a move. I have nothing left, do you hear me? Absolutely nothing." Richard's face flushed a deep, dangerous crimson. With a sudden, violent motion, his arm whipped forward, sending a half-empty plastic cup flying across the room. It struck the stained wall with a dull, hollow crack, splashing lukewarm water across the peeling wallpaper before bouncing uselessly to the floor. "You utter fool," Richard roared, his voice shaking the very frame of the cheap door. "You had everything. A brilliant, wealthy wife who loved you. A luxury apartment that defined your success. A life of absolute privilege. And you threw it all into the gutter for some cheap thrill. Now look at you. You have no house, no money, and not a single shred of dignity left to your name." Before David could find the words to defend his shattered pride, a sharp, cold ping echoed from his pocket. The digital tone felt incredibly intrusive in the heavy silence of the room. With trembling fingers he pulled out his phone. The screen's harsh blue light illuminated his pale, sweat-slicked face. It was an email from corporate HR. He tapped it open, his eyes widening as the bold subject line burned into his retinas. Notice of immediate termination and demand for restitution. His breath caught in his throat as his eyes scanned the formal, clinical prose of the letter. It was written with the cold precision of a guillotine. The company had launched an internal investigation and uncovered irrefutable evidence of his fraudulent leave of absence. But the nightmare did not end there. The audit had dug deeper, excavating a dark secret he had buried for 2 long years. They had discovered a systematic pattern of embezzlement. He had forged corporate expense receipts to siphon off thousands of dollars of company funds. The ultimatum was clear, stark, and terrifying. The company demanded full restitution of every single stolen cent within 5 business days. If he failed to comply, they would immediately hand the file over to the district attorney to file formal criminal charges. The phone became suddenly, impossibly heavy, slipping from his numb, lifeless fingers and clattering onto the worn carpet. He sat there utterly paralyzed, his mind spinning into a dark, bottomless abyss. This was the absolute end of the road. He hadn't just lost his beautiful wife, his comfortable home, or his stolen wealth. He had systematically destroyed his career, erased his reputation, and was now staring directly down the cold, metallic barrel of a prison sentence. "They fired me," he whispered, his voice a ghost of its former self as he stared blankly at the floorboards. "They want the money back. All of it. Eleanor. It was Eleanor. She did this. She knew exactly where to strike. She has completely and utterly destroyed me." Upon hearing the word prison, the fragile thread holding Teresa together finally snapped. She let out a sharp, horrified gasp, her eyes rolling back as her legs gave way. She collapsed onto the dusty carpet with a dull, heavy thud. Instantly, the tiny, claustrophobic motel room erupted into absolute chaos. Richard scrambled down to the floor, shouting her name and frantically slapping her cold cheeks, his hands shaking with terror. Yet, amid the shouting and the panic, David remained frozen. He pulled his knees up to his chest, retreating into the corner of the room, curling his body into a tight, defensive ball. For the first time in his pampered, arrogant life, a cold, primal terror for his own future seized his heart, freezing the very blood in his veins. A week dragged by like a slow, painful waking dream. It was on a gray, overcast afternoon that Isabella called me. Her voice on the line was stripped of all its usual playful melody, replaced instead by a desperate, hollow pleading. She begged me to meet her, her pride entirely gone. Out of a strange, detached curiosity, I agreed. When she walked into the quiet, dimly lit coffee shop, I had to look twice to recognize her. The radiant, sun-kissed woman from the Maui photos, the one who had smiled so victoriously next to my husband, was entirely gone. In her place stood a pale shadow of a person, her eyes hollowed out by sleepless nights, her skin drained of all color and life. She sat down heavily opposite me and without a word, slid a thick, heavy manila envelope across the polished wooden table. "This is the last $12,000 he transferred to me," she whispered, her voice trembling, her gaze fixed on the table. The rest is already gone. I spent it. Please just take it. My parents, they found out about everything. They told me they won't ever let me step foot back into their house until I return every single cent I have left to you." She paused, her breath catching in her throat, before reaching into her purse once more. With a slow, agonizing hand, she pulled out a folded medical document and slid it gently over the table toward me. "I went to a clinic," she said, her voice cracking as a single tear escaped her eye. "I terminated the pregnancy. I realized I could never, in good conscience, bring a child into this world with a man like that. He lied to me about everything. He lied to you. He lied to everyone. I was so incredibly stupid." Looking at her broken, weeping figure across the table, I felt a sudden, unexpected pang of pity tighten in my chest. There was no denying she was a gold digger, a woman who had willingly tried to build her own happiness on the wreckage of my marriage. But she was also a victim, thoroughly manipulated and ensnared by David's pathological, masterful webs of deceit. I reached out and pulled the heavy envelope toward me. "I will deduct this amount from the total sum he owes me in our final divorce settlement," I said, my voice calm, steady, and devoid of malice. "As for what you did with your body, that was your choice and yours alone to make. Just remember this lesson for the rest of your life. You can never build a beautiful, happy life on the weeping ruins of someone else's." At my words, the dam broke. Isabella buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as she broke down into quiet, bitter sobbing. I stood up, adjusting my coat, and walked away without looking back, leaving her alone in the quiet hum of the cafe to drown in the heavy waters of her own regrets. Another month passed, bringing with it the cold, persistent rains of late autumn. On a particularly bleak Tuesday evening, as the sky bruised into a dark violet and the rain poured down in relentless sheets, I walked out of my office building. There, standing under the flickering street lamps, was David. I barely recognized him. He looked like a common vagrant, his clothes cheap, wrinkled, and thoroughly soaked through by the freezing rain. His hair was wild and unkempt, his face hollowed by hunger and stress. The moment his desperate eyes locked onto mine, he did not speak. Instead, he literally dropped to his knees slamming hard against the cold, wet pavement right there in front of everyone. "Eleanor, please," he sobbed, his hands reaching out to clutch at the hem of my coat, his voice cracking with a desperate, pathetic urgency. "Please forgive me. I made a terrible mistake. It was Isabella. She manipulated me, she seduced me, she took everything from me. Please, I beg of you, take me back. Just give me one more chance to make this right." I looked down at the trembling man kneeling in the dirty, rain-slicked gutter. A wave of sheer, unadulterated disgust washed over me. "Get up, David," I said, my voice cold and hard as ice. "Stop humiliating yourself. You made your choice and now you must live with it. Even Isabella had the decency to return some of the stolen money. She has more of a conscience than you ever did," I spat, each syllable cold and sharp as the autumn rain slicing through the dark city air. The comparison to Isabella seemed to strike him like a physical blow, his face contorting into a mask of raw, unfiltered desperation. But it was not shame or regret that registered in his hollowed, shadowed eyes. It was something far baser, far more pathetic. At the mere mention of the word money, a sickening, predatory spark of pure greed ignited behind his tear-swollen lids. It was the frantic, ugly glimmer of a drowning man desperately grasping at the edge of a blade, willing to cut himself just to stay afloat. "You have money," he rasped, his voice cracking into a pathetic, pleading whimper that made my stomach churn with deep revulsion. He reached out with trembling, wet fingers, clawing uselessly at the air near the hem of my coat, not quite daring to touch me. "Please, Eleanor, you have to help me pay back the company. They are auditing everything, tracing every cent. If I do not return the funds, they are going to prosecute me. I am going to jail, Eleanor. Do you hear me? I am going to jail." I looked down at the miserable, shivering creature groveling at my feet on the wet, filthy pavement. I remembered the arrogant, mocking husband who had once laughed behind my back, the man who had so casually traded my devotion and our shared dreams for cheap thrills and stolen wealth. Now he was nothing but a broken, empty shell, begging for salvation from the very woman he had so ruthlessly betrayed. A profound, icy calm washed over me, replacing any lingering anger with pure, unadulterated apathy. "Fix your own problems, David," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and utterly devoid of mercy. I took a deliberate, slow step to the side, stepping around his kneeling form as if he were nothing more than a discarded piece of trash blocking my path. "I will see you in court." At that exact moment, my Uber pulled up to the curb, its headlights cutting through the dark, rainy night. I opened the door, welcoming the sudden rush of warm, leather-scented air that contrasted so sharply with the freezing storm outside. I stepped inside and closed the door firmly, shutting out the howling wind and his desperate, muffled cries. As the driver smoothly pulled away into the flow of city traffic, I settled deep into the plush, dry seat, looking straight ahead. I did not turn around. I did not look back through the rear window to see him weeping on the wet pavement, a solitary, pathetic figure drowning in the storm of his own making. When the day of the divorce hearing finally arrived, I was the picture of absolute composure, completely calm and collected. I had meticulously chosen my outfit, wearing an impeccably tailored suit that radiated quiet power and unshakable resolve. My hair was swept back perfectly, my expression cool and detached. I was a woman who had already reclaimed her life and her dignity. David, by contrast, sat across the courtroom looking utterly undone and utterly alone. He was a miserable, broken figure, unable to afford a decent lawyer to represent him. He sat huddled next to a disinterested public defender, looking rumpled and gaunt. During the proceedings, David tried desperately to spin a narrative of misfortune, stammering weak, pathetic excuses to the judge about bad investments and unexpected market volatility. But his stuttering words fell flat in the face of the mountain of evidence my legal team had prepared. My lawyer presented a flawless, devastating paper trail. The forensic accounting, the bank statements detailing his illicit transfers, and the overwhelming evidence of his embezzlement left him absolutely no way out. There was no room for his lies, no escape hatch for his deceit. The judge, a stern and no-nonsense woman, did not hesitate. She finalized the divorce with a swift, decisive strike of her gavel. The ruling was an absolute triumph for me. She granted me full, undivided ownership of our luxury apartment and legally ordered David to repay every single cent of the remaining embezzled marital funds. Walking out of that grand stone courthouse, the crisp morning air felt incredibly sweet. I had won. I walked out a victor, finally and completely free of his shadow. 2 years flew by like a beautiful golden dream. One evening I found myself sitting at a chic, exclusive rooftop bar in San Francisco, perched high above the bustling streets, overlooking the glittering, breathtaking skyline that stretched out like a blanket of endless diamonds. I was slowly sipping a glass of crisp, perfectly chilled white wine, letting the cool evening breeze gently play with my hair. After the finalization of the divorce, I had wasted no time in closing that dark chapter of my life. I sold the New York apartment, took the substantial equity, packed my bags, and relocated to the West Coast. It was the best decision I had ever made. I had accepted a prestigious position as the regional director for a massive, multi-billion-dollar international tech firm. I had rebuilt my life from the ashes, crafting a brilliant, highly successful career. But more than that, I had rebuilt myself. I was healthier, more radiant, and possessed an infinite, quiet confidence that shone through in everything I did. Suddenly, the gentle vibration of my phone on the slate table broke my peaceful reverie. It was a text message from Paul. "Ellie, guess who I just saw?" I ordered an Uber to the airport and the driver was David. Beneath the text was an image, taken secretly from the safety of the back seat. I tapped it, zooming in on the driver's reflection in the rearview mirror. The man staring blankly at the dark asphalt ahead was almost unrecognizable. He was thin, hollow-cheeked, and incredibly haggard, his skin a sallow, unhealthy gray under the harsh dashboard lights of a beat-up, dusty sedan. His shoulders were slumped in defeat, his eyes vacant and dead to the world. "He looks terrible," Paul's next text read, followed quickly by another. He recognized me. He didn't say a single word the whole ride. Word is he's living in a crappy, damp basement apartment, driving 16 hours a day just to pay off his massive legal debts to the company and avoid jail time. His parents went back to Pennsylvania. His mom had a stroke and is completely bedridden, and his dad just drinks all day to forget. It is a total disaster. I stared at the photograph for a long, quiet moment. I searched my heart for pity, for anger, or even a flicker of satisfaction. There was absolutely nothing. Not a single ounce of emotion warmed or chilled my chest. His ruin was not my doing. It was simply the natural, unyielding consequence of his own choices. The universe had merely balanced the scales of justice. Without a word, I set the phone face down on the table, letting the image vanish into the dark glass screen. "What are you thinking about?" The voice beside me was warm, rich, and tender. I looked up to meet the eyes of Andrew, a handsome, effortlessly elegant venture capitalist who had been patiently and passionately pursuing me for the last 6 months. He smiled warmly, sliding a fresh glass of wine toward me, his fingers gently brushing against mine. I smiled back at him, a genuine, radiant expression that reached my eyes. "The past," I murmured softly, letting the memory of David dissolve into the cool evening air. "But it is just the past." Andrew raised his glass, the amber light of the city skyline catching the crystal. "To the future," he promised, his eyes locking onto mine. "To the future," I agreed, raising my own glass to meet his. The sharp crystal clink of our glasses rang out with perfect clarity in the night air. A beautiful, resonant chime announcing the beginning of a brand new life, one that was entirely free and fiercely